your mic. You can put it on when your part comes up, okay?
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, and I had taken a peek at the agenda, and it looks like I'm not on for a little while, but I didn't know what time I needed to log in, so that's why I'm here now. If I should,
No,
kind of
it's
hang
good to be
loose
on now.
and rejoin later, I can do that as well.
No, it's good to be on now. I'll just
6 o'clock, January 25th, 2021. I'll call to order this meeting of the Select Board for the town of Chelmsford. Two quick notices. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A and Section 18, and subsequent orders imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information, general guidelines of remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting may be found at the town's website at www.chelmsfordma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so by accessing Chelmsford Telemedia website at www.chelmsfordtv.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. And then please note to everybody that's on the Zoom meeting here, any note that you put in a chat, whether private or public, becomes part of the public record. So just make sure if you're using the chat feature and you're trying to chat to someone in the group that you are aware that that chat does go into the public record and will be viewable at a records request at a later date. With that, we'll start with the agenda, which I just lost.
Public service
announcement. Yep. Do we have?
I'm here.
Is that Trish?
No, it's Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. All right.
Trish here?
Go ahead, Virginia. I don't know. I don't see her.
Okay. Nomination papers for the April 6, 2021 local election are now available in the town's clerk's office. The last day to obtain nomination papers is Thursday, February 11th, 2021 at 5 p.m. If you wish to get involved in your local government, the following seats are currently available. For townwide offices, 2 select board members for 3 years, 1 school committee member for 3 years, 3 planning board members for 3 years, 1 associate planning board member for 2 years, 1 board of health member for 3 years, 2 trustees of the public library members for 3 years, 1 cemetery commission member for 3 years, and 1 housing authority member for 5 years. For town meeting members, Precinct 1, 6 for 3 years, Precinct 2, 6 for 3 years, Precinct 3, 6 for 3 years, and 1 for 1 year for 1 year unexpired term. Precinct 4, 6 for 3 years, Precinct 5, 6 for 3 years, and 1 for a 2-year unexpired term. Precinct 6, 6 for 3 years, and 1 for a 2-year unexpired term. Precinct 7, 6 for 3 years, Precinct 8, 6 for 3 years, and 1 for a 1-year unexpired term, and Precinct 9, 6 for 3 years, and 1 for a 1-year unexpired term. Townwide offices require the signatures of 50 registered voters in Chelmsford. Town meeting representatives require the signatures of 25 registered Chelmsford voters that live within the same precinct as the candidate. The town clerk recommends gathering at least 20% more than the minimum number required to ensure that certification is successful. Electronic signatures are not allowed per Mass General Law. However, once nomination papers are pulled, candidates may make additional copies for distribution to others to assist with gathering signatures. The last day to file nomination papers with the Board of Registrars is Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 at 5 p.m. And the last day to register to vote for the local election is Wednesday, March 17th at 5 p.m.
Thank you, Virginia. With that, we'll move to item 3 on the agenda, the open session. If anybody would like to address the board, please do so either by turning on their camera or putting a note in the chat and or waving at us. I don't see anybody on here other than people presenting tonight, though. With that, I'm going to move on. Item 4 on the agenda of the committee vacancies.
Yep. So as of today, the vacancies are the ADA coordinator has 1 vacancy. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies, and the CCA Advisory Committee has 2. The Center Village Master Plan Implementation Committee has 2 vacancies. The Commission on Disabilities has 2 vacancies. The Community Action Program Committee has 1 vacancy. The Council on Aging has 1 vacancy and 5 associate member positions open. The Energy Conservation Committee has 3 vacancies. The Holiday Decorating Committee has 1 vacancy. The Middlesex Canal Commission has two vacancies. And the Parade Committee welcomes all applicants for 1-year terms. The Permanent Building Committee has 1 vacancy. The Personnel Board has 1 vacancy. The Public Celebrations Committee has 5 vacancies. The Recycling Committee has 1 vacancy. The Roberts Field Advisory Committee has 1 vacancy, and the Tree Committee has 2 vacancies. If you're interested in serving on a town board or committee, complete an application available on the town website or contact the town manager's office at tmoffice@chelmsfordma.gov, telephone 978-250-5202.
Okay, thank you. We have next up town manager bid awards. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, we're seeking this evening a bid award for a planimetric mapping and orthoimagery acquisition project, which is what I commonly refer to as digital flyover. Back at Springtown meeting, funding was approved to update our GIS mapping, which helps out with all aspects of the town, from topographic to boundaries and so forth. DPW issued an RFP through the engineering division. Steve Youngley, the assistant director who's on this meeting, was involved with that, along with Christina Papadopoulos, our town engineer, and Nathan Walker. It was a 2-stage RFP in terms of, one is, you're not looking in a case like this to have the lowest priced provider. You want to have a quality provider and then see if they fit within the budget that's available for the town. So in this case, the RFP was issued, 6 proposals were received. They rank the non-price or qualification proposals individually. They then interviewed the top firms for the non-price by ranking. In this case, the first bid proposer was over the asking price by a material amount. So they then went on to the second bid, which was a company that was selected. It's Quantum Spatial Incorporated. Their bid price was $99,975. They meet the criteria and have the experience for this work. And so that's the recommended bid award. And obviously this type of work you tend to want to do in the late spring before the leaves bloom, because that's sort of the best time to get your imagery, which again then would be stored into our data system as part of the flyover. So I'm seeking the board's approval for the bid award to Quantum Spatial Incorporated for this flyover project in the amount of $99,975.
Anybody have any questions?
What were the non-price criteria?
Steve, do you want to jump in and just sort of give a little insight into the board as to how you and Christina and Nathan have conducted this? Thanks.
Yeah, so a lot of it is set up typical to when we do this type of RFP process. We look for firm qualifications, experience with a project of this size and magnitude within a certain time frame, the last 3 to 5 years, to prove that they can do this type of project. Does the firm have the capabilities to meet the schedule that we, included in the proposal? In this case, the materials are due for final approval over the course of the summer, June, July timeframe. So we wanted to make sure that the company could produce that in the necessary timeframe. There's a few other. It works out to 7 or 8 off the top of my head sections that we rank. Like Paul said, we had six companies bid. We interviewed the top four because they were scored very close between the three of us. And then, as Paul also stated, obviously our top selection got kicked because their price proposal was over our budget. So we chose Quantum, who was a very close second. They've done work in other local communities. Drake most recently, they did their planimetric update a couple of years ago. So they're also working for the state of Massachusetts at this time. So we're very comfortable with them.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
If not, I'll make a motion to approve the town manager bid award to Quantum Spatial for the planimetric mapping and orthoimagery acquisition project as presented.
I'll second the motion.
A motion and a second. All in favor by roll call. Pat?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Virginia?
Aye.
And I will vote aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members.
And we're going to keep it with you, Paul. You have an appointment for us?
Yeah, I'm seeking one appointment. It's a confirmation for the Historic District Commission. I'm seeking the appointment of Donna Reddy as an alternate member of the commission for a 3-year term expiring June 30th, 2023. Donna, as many aware, is a recent resident in the Historic District, but certainly she's not new to Chelmsford or Chelmsford's government. So we would certainly seek your approval of her appointment to this commission.
Do you have any questions about her application? No.
I'll make a motion to approve the appointment of Donna Reddy as an alternate member for the Historic District Commission for a 3-year term expiring June 30th, 2023.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor by roll call. Pat?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Virginia?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye.
Thank you, members of the board.
We're going to keep it right with you, Paul. Let you do your manager's reports.
Okay, I've got the proposed fiscal year 2022 capital and operating budgets. John Souza's on the call, and obviously John is integral with the development of the capital and operating budgets with me. And if I could so impose upon John, Mr. Chairman, if you could allow John to share screen, and John, if you could retrieve the PowerPoint proposal from either the board agenda or from the cloud file, and then we'll just walk right through it. But and while John's doing that, I'll just provide some introductory remarks so we're not here with static time. The town charter provides that the town manager provides a budget within 90 days of the scheduled date of the spring annual town meeting. We're basically at that point, believe it or not. We're at the end of January, and roughly 3 months from now will be the scheduled date for the spring annual town meeting. So we provide a capital and operating budget to you. As you're aware, as the board and many who may be watching this meeting, just 2 weeks ago, we had a joint meeting of the select board, school committee, and finance committee, where we had an overview of the fiscal year 22 fiscal conditions and operating budget environment. A goal was voted in which to utilize the tax levy to the available amount under Proposition 2.5. Towards that end, I did have a follow-up from that meeting. I did meet with the superintendent of schools and have received his cooperation throughout this process. And so I prepared a budget for the upcoming fiscal year, and capital and operating, and all those materials are attached to the agenda. I will not go through all of the materials, but they are all there, and they're available for the public and for you to have available both prior to and following this meeting. It's all the detailed line items, and it's all the capital items as well as their project descriptions. And it sort of puts us in the place. And I think the thing to note is this is a fluid process. We're in obviously extraordinary times with the pandemic, but it's obviously the resulting financial times and impact on the state, local, and federal, and really world economy is very extraordinary. The governor, Governor Baker, is scheduled to deliver his State of the State meeting address tomorrow evening, and then he's scheduled under the provisions of the state law to provide his operating budget for the state tomorrow. On Wednesday. And that'll give us the first insight as to, his vision of the upcoming fiscal year. The legislature and the governor have agreed upon a revenue target for the state budget. They forecast a 3.5% increase in state funding levels beyond the current fiscal year. And we know this current fiscal year's budget was only settled just over a month ago. As the legislature wrapped up its session, which again was an extraordinary year with COVID environment impacting the economy. So with that end, the governor addressed the Massachusetts Municipal Association annual meeting last Friday. And then the day previous to that, the lieutenant governor did an address to the Mass Municipal Association at their statewide annual meeting, again, all virtual. And through that, we learned two pieces of the governor's proposed budget. One is the governor is continuing his commitment to increase the level of unrestricted general government aid, or what we used to call lottery aid and additional assistance, at the same level of funding as that which is the growth in the state budget, which is 3.5%. So when that was announced on Thursday, I put those numbers into this equation and the packet went out. However, on Thursday, the lieutenant governor didn't give any indication of what the state was going to do with Chapter 70 education funding. When Governor Baker addressed the Mass Municipal Association on Friday afternoon, he informed the community and obviously the Commonwealth that he would submit a budget that funds the implementation of the Student Opportunities Act, or the full first year funding for the Chapter 70 education funds. And as we've discussed in previous meetings, for the town of Chelmsford, we're a minimum funding community. So that would be $30 per student, or roughly $150,000 in proposed Chapter 70 education funding, or about a 1.4% increase. Those numbers are not baked into this budget because, again, this budget went out, but they will be incorporated as we go forward. The other piece that we don't know regarding the governor's budget, and it probably will come out on Wednesday, is they will release the local aid revenues and assessments in conjunction with the budget release. And that again gives us the first insight in terms of what is not only the funding levels like Chapter 70 education aid, and also additional assistance and so forth, but it also gives us insights into our assessments for charter school tuitions and out of district funding and so forth. So that will be known on Wednesday, and then we'll plug those in and issue that information out on Wednesday. So where it goes from here, yes. Yes.
So while you're on the topic of Governor Baker,
yeah.
In the press releases when he was talking about funding the Chapter 70 levels, he also talked about authorizing $200 million in Chapter 90 funds. Is that represent a significant increase over what was in the past, or is that pretty much status quo?
That's status quo.
Okay.
That he announced that he'd be filing a bill for Chapter 90 highway funds for $200 million. That funding level has been static with the state for at least 8 years at this point, sadly enough. In fact, the only year that it deviated was his first year when he came in. The first day he was in office, he provided an extra $100 million at that time. And ever since then, the cities and towns and municipal associations have been asking for, including a request that was made within the last 2 weeks, have asked for a $300 million funding level statewide, but that is not incorporated by the governor. We doubt with the state's revenue and financial challenges that it would happen, but short answer to your question is no, it's a static funding level from where we're at. And that for Chelmsford, just to put it in perspective, that gives us about $1.2 million annually. And as we've discussed in the past, really, it's not even half the amount that one would need if you really logistically looked at the miles of road we have and the life of infrastructure. But we will, plan on that. And, and as we all know, there is a DPW road maintenance plan, and they will apply those monies as we move forward. So with that as intro, the next slide is the budget highlights. It's a $144.2 million budget, which is a 3.9% increase. I have funded the Chelmsford Public Schools at $65 million. You may recall there was considerable discussion at the meeting 2 weeks ago about the school funding level. This would sort of put them whole, meaning they would, last fiscal year, they were funded at $61 million. The original funding request for this current fiscal year was $63. That was the original budget. That got pared back by $1.3 million because of the uncertainty with the pandemic, and the school department used one-time monies. Going forward for fiscal 22, that'll start next July 1st, that will be at $65 million. So that's an increase, you can see, a total of $3.3 million, or 5.4%. General government departments, which is basically all those operating of the departments of the town, aside from the school department, it's a $32 million budget, or roughly half the size of the school department. And that's funded at an increase of $1.1 million, or 3.4%. The estimate I have from Nashoba Tech, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, is $280,000 increase in the assessment, or 8%. Benefits and insurance is at $27 million roughly, which is a $1.4 million increase, or almost over 5.5%. And then our debt service budget continues to decrease. It's now down to $12.7 million out of the $144 million, which is a decrease of over $780,000, or 5.8%. Yes, go ahead.
When is the enrollment deadline for Nashoba Tech? Like, when do we know?
Oh, the enrollments are based on October 1st. The state requires cities and towns to do an October 1st student census. Okay. And that becomes the official student level for a year. So what happens with Nashoba Tech is, under the regional school agreement, their enrollment on October 1st, 2020, which is 3 months ago, becomes the basis of the funding level for the next fiscal year that starts the following July. So they take those numbers from October, and then when they release their budget in February, the percentage enrollment is based on that October. So you're always a year behind, or the enrollments applied a year ahead to the upcoming budget. So if it wouldn't matter if students moved in or out of Nashoba, this week or next month or what have you. The state's formula also does the same thing. They release the Chapter 70 education monies based on the October 1st school enrollments.
Thank you.
So that's what we have at this point in time. So moving quickly on.
A couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, just on the side. So the first one. So the $3.3 million for the schools that you came up with, did that come from a bunch of different areas where you swapped some money around, or was that solely by the ability for you to go to the full levy limit?
That's pretty much basically going to the full levy limit. You will see as we go further into the details, and certainly in the line items, that on the general government side, we basically are just doing level service budget, and the only increases are sort of extraordinary items, beyond, in terms of material increases, such as rubbish removal and so forth. Any additional funding that came in, basically we applied it towards the school budget to get our budget in balance, and we are in balance. So, for example, when the additional state aid came in at the funding level of the 3.5%, that shifted over, again, in the aggregate. Also, the one change you'll see coming up, the other thing that was announced at the Mass Municipal Association Maya meeting last Friday is the average rate for health insurance increase comes out to be 2.9%, which is more favorable than the 5% that we were using as a budget number. So those savings also go back in and help, provide additional funding that balances the budget for the school thing. So those type of
Paul,
changes.
You brought that up. So you're saying that they were saying, well, in the attachments to the agenda tonight, it said that MIA Blue communities saw approximately 3%. Now, you're saying the increase for Chelmsford was 6.1%.
Right, because
$785,000.
because it's not just the rate increase, it's also your enrollment. And also
Right.
that 3% is an average. We are rated on our actual claims experience. And so we've used a 3% number for the budget, but we have increasing enrollment, particularly in retirees. It's what's driving those numbers up.
Okay, so when you gave us a total annual premium of
Yep.
25,443.
Yep.
And you said the town share was 19 and it was going to 19.6. That's a 3% increase?
Yes.
Or is that the 3% the state's getting? So the 6% you're talking about above is really just more subscribers?
There's more subscribers and yes, exactly. And the way we do it is we use our November 1st health insurance enrollment as the basis for developing those formulas each year. And then also what happens is you have more subscribers, and so we actually use what's in place at that time, because as one who follows healthcare, if somebody has a material event, they can change their healthcare plan at any time. And obviously we have open enrollment each spring. So what we do is when we budget, we based upon the November 1st actual enrollment of enrollees in the active plans and retiree plans.
Right, because at that point it's set in stone, right?
Exactly.
By November.
As best we can.
Yeah, so that's the part I couldn't understand. When we're looking at your numbers, it does look like the town share of every family plan's cost is going at 3%, but you're saying that the town increase is 6.1.
Right.
So 3 of that is the 3% town share, and then 3.1 is increased enrollments, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so moving on, again, I won't read through all the slides, but the moving on to the next slide, it's the budget is balanced. We maintain services. We don't add any general government positions, and we fund our capital at 3.9. The budget priorities remain the same: education, public safety, capital, and health and human services. Moving on to the line item changes, and this is where the devil's in the details. You can see that the overall budget line items increased by 5.4 million, of which the public schools is 3.3 of that, or roughly 60%. And then the other big one is benefits and insurance, which has a 5.53% increase, or 1.4 million. That's another 20%. And then you can see the balance is filled in primarily the largest departments of the town. Nashoba Tech assessment we talked about, public safety, public works. And again, the big one driving the public works increase is the solid waste, recycling, and collection, which I'll go into some more detail later on in this presentation. And then you can see the others are more nominal. And then you can see the decrease in the debt service of almost 800,000. And you see the footnote, we cannot fund unresolved contracts, labor agreements. So you'll see a disparity between, again, the budget line items and anticipated revenues. There would be levy capacity to fund agreements when those are settled. The next slide you can see is the revenue summary. It's again, the additional revenue out of the 144.2 million mostly comes from the property tax. The increase in utilizing the total levy would be a $6.7 million increase. State aid, again, prior to the Chapter 70 is 321,000, local receipts 600,000, and then the available funds, the 1.9 million, is roughly the 2 million that we use from the general stabilization fund to offset the levy, minus the other minor changes that occur within that account that bring it down to 1.93. Again, what I anticipate, and we'll get to this a little later, at the end of the day, we will probably not be at levy limit, but because again, things will change, as we move forward. So looking over historically, we look back over 5 and 10 years. Again, you see the changes that are highlighted in bold. The money goes to the large departments, no surprise. You can see over a 5-year period, Chelmsford Public Schools, we put in 10.45 million over that period. But however, it's only about a 19% increase in terms of percentage-wise. So their share of the budget is remaining the same, but obviously dollar-wise, it's growing. You can see Nashoba Tech is more of an outlier. Our enrollment, as we talked about, and you'll see later in this thing, is growing at Nashoba Tech. So you see a 31% increase over 5 years, or almost, or 900,000, or 9.9 million. Public safety, again, in benefits and insurance, you can see, and then you can see debt service. Our debt service is down 10% in 5 years. You go to the next slide, you see the 10-year period.
Paul,
Yes, yes, Virginia.
Can you back up?
Sure.
So you highlighted, you bold-faced a couple that were, 25% and above, but
Yeah.
there's a couple others. So like,
Yeah.
what are the drivers for something like community services that's up
Sure.
28%, or municipal
Sure.
facilities, or even
Yeah,
the admin?
Sure. When you're in a small budget, minor changes can make a big difference. Like community services, 5 years ago, we did not have a community services coordinator. So when you add a salary of a community services coordinator into a $1 million or so base budget from 5 years ago, it skews the numbers. So
So that's the addition of,
so that's
the addition of the personnel.
exactly.
now.
So that's generally what happens in those instances.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so over a 10-year period, you can see that the trend is generally stays the same. Again, Nashoba Tech, you can see the Nashoba Tech has doubled in 10 years, from 1.84 million to an estimate of 3.73 million this year. We've funded the schools by $20 million, from 45 to 65 million over a 10-year period, or roughly 2 million a year, not compounding. And you can see benefits and insurance have grown $1 million almost per year over a 10-year period, of roughly 50%. And you can see our debt service is down even over a 10-year period, by 2%. So one of the things we're mindful of is our debt position, and we're pretty fortunate with that. Really, our normal debt is really our capital funding going over the years, and you see some of the longer term projects dropping off over that period, such as the funding for the police station and the library, which all get paid off over the last 10-year period. So that gives sort of an overview of funding. And now getting into more specifics of the Chelmsford Public Schools, as I noted earlier, the line item increase is 3.3 million to $65 million for the upcoming year. And the next slide just shows you the increases over that 10-year period. And you can see it's roughly been about a $2 million increase per year. And obviously the anomaly was last year, which gets offset by the upcoming fiscal year. So that, that's sort of the discussion again we had the other evening. More importantly, as you go to the next slide with the state's funding level history, you can see that the state, and we talked about this again, the state's funding level has certainly been below inflation, and roughly has been about $150,000 in recent years. It was zero for this current year because of the pandemic. And again, if the governor's commitment were to be fulfilled, it'd be another 152,820, or somewhere around that area for fiscal 22, the upcoming fiscal year. So again, you see a school budget that's growing by $2 million per year, and an increase in state funding at roughly 150,000. And that explains that continued divergence of how the burden of cost, is really falling on the municipality. The next slide just shows you the summary of this public schools funding requirement under what the state school funding formula. And clearly we're over it in this case, this current fiscal year, we're over by 36%. And it's really not changing much in recent years, and probably won't, it'll probably increase slightly, because again, if your enrollment's not growing and your state aid's not growing, but we're funding at the service level that to fund contractual obligations, you're going to see that 36% number continue to tick up as we move forward. So I then take a little bit of time, as we did the other evening. Again, I do this because I try to make this sort of a somewhat standalone document for those who didn't see the presentation 2 weeks ago. But we're probably spending roughly $16,000 per year in per pupil expenditures. Moving on to the next slide, what that means, if somebody can grasp that, is it costs about $90 per pupil per day during the school year. So if you put that into a classroom with 21 other children, or 22 total, a classroom costs you about $350,000 per year. And then if you did it over the entire school year, you're probably costing you $2,000 per classroom per day. It just puts it into hopefully some type of perspective of costs. But more importantly, you start looking at comparisons. Well, how does Chelmsford fund itself compared to those comparable communities, as we discussed 2 weeks ago? This is better shown on the next slide, which is the chart, because and you can see Chelmsford right in the middle in terms of per pupil expenditure by these communities that the state identifies as our comparable communities, as well as the neighboring communities around us that I add with them. So you can see Tewksbury is on the high end and Drake on the low end. Chelmsford tends to be in the middle. Burlington's certainly an outlier on the far end of this data. And then similarly, if you go to the next data, which is special education, in terms of what the funding levels and the percentage of students who are enrolled in special education, the next slide sort of shows you that graphically, and it just sort of indicates that Chelmsford probably a little bit towards the higher end of percentage of students that are receive circuit breaker, which is out of district special education services, and then using that, moving on to more data in terms of teacher ratio, student teacher ratio. You can see that the student teacher ratio for Chelmsford schools has declined during the past decade. The most recent data we have, fiscal 20, which was last June 30th, it was 13.6. So again, I provide data for these comparable towns. And on the next slide, you see graphically, you can see that Chelmsford's student teacher ratio tends to be in the middle amongst those comparable towns. So again, it indicates the sort of the Chelmsford where we sort of always try to be is right sort of in the middle amongst our peers. And then the last data is average class size. You can see that the average class size at Chelmsford Public Schools is declining in recent years. That's mostly attributed to a decline in enrollment. And then I provide the average class size data again for these comparable towns, and then graphically show it. And you can see Chelmsford's class size tends to be on the lower end of the spectrum, where Burlington, as we saw, was an outlier in terms of per pupil funding. You can clearly see they have the smallest class sizes amongst the comparable communities. Chelmsford tends to be lower, and you can see a community like Drake, who was at the other end in terms of per pupil expenditure, tends to have larger average class size. So again, it just gives some relative data. The next slide is what the superintendent, Dr. Lang, presented, the budget drivers for the schools. Well, why are their budget have to go up $2 million per year? And you can see mostly it's due to their labor costs. I mean, we're a labor organization. We provide education services. You can see 1.4 million is for employee cost of living, which is the 2% contractual increase in the salary schedule, as well as their step increases. The lane changes, which is the next item, which is when a teacher has more certifications and gets a higher rate of pay based upon their educational attainment. They also fund their retirement incentives, and then they also recognize costs increasing in student regular transportation and special education transportation, their contracted cleaning contract, and their utilities. So again, that brought them up to that $2 million funding level. And then if you apply the one-time funds that they applied to their current budget, they're at $3.3 million. Moving on to Nashoba Tech real briefly. Again, Dr. Pidgeon gave a detailed assessment. I'm not going to repeat that, and I don't. But you can see the estimated assessment increase is $280,000 or 8%. And the next slide sort of goes into that budget detail and answers the question that Virginia was asking earlier, is based on the October 1st enrollment, Chelmsford's enrollment at the school increased by 11 students to a total of 212, while the whole district's enrollment increased by only 10 students. So Nashoba Tech's member enrollment, meaning the member communities in the district, is now at 664. So you can see we're almost a third, and you can see the red bold letters that our share increased from 30.58% to almost 32%. So again, even if their budget stayed the same as we talked about 2 weeks ago, we'd have to give them an extra $152,000 just based upon the enrollment shift. Yeah, go ahead.
Paul. Does the
Please.
district agreement, is it strictly like a linear allocation?
Yes.
Okay.
We're assigned their operating budget and debt service and such is all based upon member enrollment. So and you'll see that when Dr. Pidgeon releases her budget in 2 weeks, or if you go back and look at the current year's budget, you'll see she'll have a detailed spreadsheet that lines up all of their costs and then apportions it by enrollment. So again, what I did is I took that member percentage of our enrollment, the 31.93%, took the current year's budget and then assumed that their budget would increase the same level as this current year at 3.26%. And that's why I come up with the $280,000 rough number. And so again, it's not going to be exactly 280, but it's probably not going to deviate significantly in either direction. And when we're funding a $144 million budget, it will just get, absorbed because you have to. It's an assessment. So the next slide sort of shows our enrollment increase at Nashoba Tech over the years. You can see, it's been a steady ascent. And again, just over the last 5 years, we've added 28 students, or 15%, in a period in which Chelmsford enrollment's actually been decreasing. The enrollment at Nashoba Tech has been increasing. And then similarly, as we showed 2 weeks ago, the per pupil expenditure today for Nashoba Tech likely exceeds $23,000 per student, based on the fact that the most recent data, which is a year ago, fiscal 19, which would be June of 19, which is 2 years of spring, their end of year data report was 21,490. And you can see if it's increasing about 1,000 per year, it's a reasonable estimate to think that for the current year we're in now, it exceeds 23,000. And then again, Dr. Pigeon presented her budget drivers, and I list them here. Again, the same items: employees, cost of living, and step increases, their lane changes. Where they're funded entire government, they have to fund their increased assessment to Middlesex County retirement system. They have special education and health services that they fund. They're seeing increases in their transportation, as well as health insurance and other contracted services. So we move out of the schools, and then just a broad overview of public safety. We're the budget, again, being level staffed, we're still maintaining 69 full-time police officers, which is 54 sworn officers. If you go to the next slide, you see the number of calls for the police department. This is calendar year data. The chief just provided me this data a couple weeks ago. You can see the calls are growing, over time. So we're almost at 37,000 police calls per year, which they're responding by cruisers in time.
Is there a pattern or a category of calls that are increasing, or is it?
That's an aggregate. There is a detailed breakdown, and one of the things we've done in the past, and we could probably do this perhaps next month, is we can ask the chiefs to come in and just explain to you, because I do have the detailed breakdown. It might be good for them to come in and just give an overview of the nature of calls in terms of, you're seeing less motor vehicle accidents and citations, but you're seeing more, more types of property calls and mental health calls and so forth. And I think that would be helpful. And probably have them come in and just give an overview, because it is quite insightful in terms of the extraordinary impacts of the pandemic. Similarly, with fire, we have the same staffing levels of 63.5 full-time positions, with primarily 52 full-time firefighters at 11 per shift. And fortunately, I guess for safety purposes, on the next slide, you see that the number of fire calls that they responded to actually decreased during the calendar year. And again, Chief Ryan can note when we can have him come on at the same time and just show you the shift. Fortunately, there were less than a dozen structure fires in the last calendar year. And so again, but there was actually, they had fewer medicals and so forth. So it's an interesting change of data, but it just sort of shows you the aggregate that they're being called out, 5,500 times, and you start dividing it by month or per day, and you can see how many times they're called on an average day period. To then go into our cost drivers on the general government side, the big one is personnel. John and I assemble and meet with all the department heads, go through all their budgets line by line, person by person, and the approximate increase in the 2% cost of living increase to the salary schedules is roughly $500,000. The health insurance, as I noted earlier, On the next slide is where we're using a 3% increase. We will probably get our actual rates in 2 weeks or so, but we're using 3% at this point in time. Again, our rates are actually dependent upon our claims experience and enrollment. And so again, we've got a 785,000. And in terms of the numbers, if you go to the next slide, you can see the steady growth, particularly in the retirees. If you looked at that far right column, you can see we've got 932 retirees for the current year when we snap that off. If you go back a decade or roughly to 2011, 2010, that's a 20% increase in retirees. And whereas active employees is about a 10% increase. So clearly, and you can see in recent years, the number of active employees are pretty much staying constant, 665, 665. And you can just see the number of retirees, continue to increase, and that's a good sign, I guess, based upon, increased longevity and so forth. But, that's what's driving our numbers. So that's why, it's not perfectly aligned. And then also you have movement within those categories. In terms of people can move to supplement plans and so forth. But as I noted the other night, and I updated this slide from 2 weeks ago, the average annual premium based on a 3% increase would be over $25,000, which means the town share for an active employee is almost $20,000.
Is that 25? So the 25-75 split? Is it the employee pays the 25%?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, that's withheld.
So,
that's withheld from their payroll. Yeah.
Okay, so we choose what that split is.
Well, yeah, that's basically it's contractual.
Okay.
Negotiated with the union.
Yeah, you have to negotiate those changes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other big one is Middlesex County retirement assessment. Again, we talked a little bit about this, but the known increase in the assessment is almost 4% to 371,000. You can see in the following chart the increase in over time, and obviously the two things to note on this: one is the big payment of the unfunded liability that's for the upcoming year, which is 22. It's the next to the bottom row is 8.3 million, and you can see that changes to 371, the far right column. But you can see the scary news is goes into 23 is that will be going up by double that, or $655,000, and we'll be paying almost $9 million in unfunded liability in fiscal 23. So that's sort of a bad indicator for next year's budget when we're, for fiscal 23, which, again, doesn't start till July 1 of 2022. So talking 18 months from now, when that would actually kick in. And just mindful, John, Susan, and I are looking at ways, is there anything we can do to address that or curb that? And the actuarials are done every 2 years by the retirement system. But so it's, we'll get back to you if we come back with any kind of a solution. What I'm sort of teasing at, but not really getting into is, we did see a community get authorization once again to look at pension obligation bonds. We haven't seen much of that activity out there or in recent years, but if we're wondering, and we're going to try to get some analysis that if a community can borrow at low rates, at 2 or 3 even taxable bonds, is there a way to address that unfunded liability? We'll let you know. The town of Andover is looking at it very aggressively. The governor just signed a special act for them. Tewksbury looked at it about a dozen years ago, but never acted upon it. So we're looking to see if
you're just playing the spread. So if you can finance it at a tax deductible 2.5, and then our obligations going up by 8, you were netting out 6 in our favor.
Right. So we're just trying to see if there's anything, and again, if it does work, you would see kind of like an aggregation thing. If it does work, it kind of mushrooms to other communities, and we'll see if it's possible. But you can just see that number is just is just continuing to grow because of the failed returns and the growth of the retirees and the actuarial schedule. So anyway,
when you talk about that, the growth of the retirees and the actuarial. I'm just not to dive into this too much tonight, but we with pension reform that went through years ago, and now municipal employees paying in I think it's 11% roughly, or
Mhm.
whatever it is.
Yep.
They're not supposed to be a drag on the system down the road.
Mhm.
Do they know roughly where that point will be with retirees today versus, future retirees? I mean, they looked at, like, what are the ages that went into place for the average employee, and will that start to hit the books in 2030, 2000? Where we get to the point where the people retiring have funded their pension versus us being on the hook for the ones that are retired now.
Right, and then that would be sort of the first column, which is your normal cost. We would just be paying on the normal costs of retirees. I haven't seen that data. Again, the focus has been always to extinguish the unfunded liability by 2037. But
When
I
did that
haven't seen
11% pension
Yeah.
funding go in? When did it? How many years ago was that?
It's 9+2 is how it is. It's 9%, and then it's 2% above 30,000. That's been in effect. That's been in effect for over 20 years. It really got aggressive back in the 80s when they started going to, you had people going 6%, 7, 8, 9, and then it was 9+2. So there really hasn't been a change.
At some point in the next 10 years, we should start to see the effect of that.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. Moving quickly to again, in summary of the next slide, which is the OPEB thing. Again, our unfunded liability is 116 for the pension. It's 52 for OPEB, for a total of 168 million, which obviously is bigger than our entire town budget. So we have a $8.3 million assessment towards the unfunded pension liability and a $1.1 million appropriation towards the unfunded OPEB liability. Moving on now to solid waste and recycling. Again, the collection costs are increasing by 4.37%. That's really driven by prevailing wage and just the company's contracted, cost for collection equipment. We don't pay anymore if the tonnage is greater. We're not paying anymore. They're not putting any more trucks out. It's just the cost for collection. Where the big cost driver is going, or 5 times this is in the tonnage. The tonnage costs are going up from basically $74.50 per ton to $90 per ton because of the shortage of landfills and trash energy plants, which made me shudder when I read the story in the Globe. I think it was yesterday, where the person wrote that they should close that plant that's right outside the Boston area because it's built on a salt marsh and so forth. And I'm like, no, that's the last thing you want to do in this market. Although we all want to recycle and reuse, there's always going to be, waste generated. And again,
Paul, they within our contract, they can just increase the tipping fees.
Yeah, we have a contractual, we have a regional contract for the plant. So Chelmsford bids along with, I think it was 8 other communities from Tewksbury, Drake-it, and so forth for solid waste disposal. In other words, where we bring our solid waste. In our area, there were only really 4 options. The plant we go to in Haverhill, so we got proposals from them, I think it was 2 years ago now. Then there's a plant in North Andover. The Covanta plant's in Haverhill. The Wheelabrator plant's in North Andover. The third option was to bring it to a rail transport facility at Devon's. And then the fourth option was to try to truck it ourselves out of state to a location. And the most cost-effective solution, believe it or not, even though with the tonnage increase, is the staying at the Covanta site in Haverhill. And so that is the new contractual period increase for that. So after the $90 per ton, I think the next year it goes up by an inflation factor to 90, 91, whatever, or 92 in the following year and so forth. But that's competitively bid under a regional consortium. And what's happening is, you're not only competing within your region, but you're also competing from other parts of New England and theoretically parts of the country, because believe it or not, they're shipping waste to places like Ohio and down in the central corridor of the country for disposal. The concern that I would have for shipping is you don't want to own it, at least good or bad. If it goes to the trash energy plant, you own the ash, you own the responsibility there. As the community found out with the BD waste oil site going back on a couple of decades ago, and the impact was about the last decade, when you bring solid waste and they put it somewhere in the ground, you kind of own that liability forever. So that, but short answer to your question is, yeah, that's bid, and it's a very captive market because of this few alternatives, because there aren't new landfills being permitted, and nobody would want to site a landfill in any community. So again, the whole goal is to continue to promote recycling and reduce the waste stream, and the state keeps doing that, and that's why they keep pulling things out, such as food waste and other things that they're just trying to get out of the waste stream. So anyway, our costs are going to go up, by roughly $400,000 for disposal based upon the increase in tonnage, as well as the increased disposal rate. Moving on to property casualty workers' compensation insurance, we've got a $50,000 increase. It's pretty much driven by the increase in the property market, or the reinsurance of the property market. And that's just based upon the insurance market that's out there, as well as their increased premiums in this climate, unfortunately, for law enforcement and public officials' liability insurance premiums. Workers' compensation is actually going the other way. Even though it grows with our payroll, the workers' compensation market has been relatively healthier in recent years. But overall, it's a $50,000 increase in the insurance markets. And next one is Medicare tax that's based upon our payroll. So as the payroll increases with the cost of living allowances, the town's contribution to Medicare tax increases. So there's another $46,000. Quickly touching upon debt service, I always include a reference from our latest bond rating report that was done last April. In this case, they note, as we saw from our data, low overall debt for the community at less than 3% of the town's market value, and we have rapid amortization, which means that within the next 10 years, 90% of our debts would be retired. So the town's in a healthy position in terms of debt service. And debt service is, yeah. Yes.
What's the difference between being AA rated and AAA? What has to happen?
For Chelmsford to be AAA rated, we'd have to do two things. One of which we can't do. One is you have to have higher demographics, meaning your per capita income of the community, which you really can't change. That's really, beyond the control of us. The second one are your cash reserves. The way for Chelmsford to be a AAA rated community, we would have to increase our stabilization fund in reserves, probably from the 10 million we have now closer to 20 million. And they would then probably give the community a AAA rating. The problem is you're tying up that money, and you're changing interest rates for a AAA versus AA. You wouldn't receive that kind of a return on your investment rates that you could really justify doing that. But we've looked at it. We have these discussions with the rating agency in terms of what would it take? Why are we only a AA plus community, or as opposed to a AAA? Because we're right on the cusp. And those are the things that come back is, we don't have the per capita income levels that a community like Westford would have, or a Carlisle and so forth, nor do we have the cash holdings that you'd have that are beyond what we have right now. And so, but that's the only thing that we could control. But I wouldn't recommend it, and we've never pursued it, to hold on to more cash reserves to push up that rating, because in essence, I don't think you can make the case that it's be material enough to, in terms of the interest rates you get when we borrow.
Do you know what percentage of municipalities in the Commonwealth are AA and AAA?
Most are AA. AAA, I would say, is probably maybe 15 to 20%. And it's your
I think I looked, Paul. I think I only saw 80 across the Commonwealth that had AAA.
Yeah, it's 80 out of 351, cities and towns and districts. So yeah, it's about that. So again, debt is part of two components. One is your excluded debt, which is the town would have voted at the ballot box and town meeting to exclude debt service for a limited time for a particular project. In Chelmsford's case, that was mostly for the sewer project. Right now, that debt service falls to $3.19 million, which is over almost almost $500,000. However, as I noted in the parentheses, that doesn't help us with the operating budget, because that debt is restricted to that purpose. So once that debt goes away, it certainly helps lower the tax levy from what it otherwise would have been, but you can't take those savings and apply it to another area of the budget. As opposed to non-excluded debt service, which is the next slide. After you see the history there, you can see how we're declining significantly over time. The next slide shows you our non-excluded debt service. That decreases by over $300,000 to, again, we've sort of peaked at fiscal year 18. And you can see that 300,000, that does provide some ability within the budget to reallocate monies elsewhere. Non-excluded debt service, the biggest part of that was for example, we funded the current fire station construction, the fire headquarters, that was funded under non-excluded debt service. The new fire station that we're constructing in North Chelmsford, that's non-excluded debt service. So that's why there's more variability over time with non-excluded, because you're basically including that within the town's taxing authority without a special exemption. And then, as I noted the other night, I include our employee totals. Again, we saw this chart the other night. We're roughly at 250 full-time government employees. That stays unchanged in this proposed budget. And you can see the schools are roughly 3 times our size in terms of employees. At latest count was 783 full-time employees in last year's budget. Again, we'll see the school's budget in the weeks ahead. And again, not much change in recent years on the town side. Budget drivers, again, so you start putting all these things together, you can see it's 5.5 million. Again, which I noted at the onset of this, again, new revenue sources, the next slide, you can see that the new revenue sources are primarily from the property tax. You see you're allowed 2.5% growth increase, projected new growth from development in the community, the excess levy capacity that we didn't levy this current year, of which 2 million of that was from the stabilization fund, and then the excluded debt service that I noted earlier that you can't use anywhere else. Then you plug in your state aid estimate, again, which doesn't have the 120 for the $30 per student. I'm sorry, 150 of the $30 per student. Local receipts, and then the available funds, which is the offset of the excess levy capacity, the 1.9 million, comes up to 5.7. As I noted at the beginning, looking, again, I also do a 5-year comparison on revenues like I did on expenditures. What's to note here is obviously, the increased reliance on the property tax, where it's almost going to be, 78% of the revenue from the town comes from the property tax. You can see the state aid, as we noted, is declining over a period of time. Local receipts, tends to be somewhat constant. And then available funds, again, there. And again, this doesn't have the data, but if you for the Chapter 70 funding, if you would add 150,000 for the increase for the current year. But clearly you can see on the Chapter 70 versus the general government aid, this Governor Baker has directed more funding in general government aid, which is why that percentage increase is growing more over time. Again, general government aid is half the funding level for Chelmsford as Chapter 70 funding. And then again, quickly, you see it over a 10-year period, the same data trend, but scarily, the Chapter 70 funding, you can see over a 10-year period, even if you add the 150, you're only at 1% or so. And we saw that earlier with the Chapter 70 slide, annual basis of funding, which again certainly isn't keeping pace with real costs, not to mention inflation. Moving on to the next slide of property tax revenue. Again, new levy capacity is at 2.5%, allowed under Proposition 2.5, plus the 1.6 million in new growth. I reintroduced the slide that we've seen, and we'll see again at town meeting. The next slide is again where your $7,400 property tax bill goes. Again, it goes to the budget areas that are the greatest, such as the schools, being 44% of that in terms of the school line item, not all school costs, just that category of department funding. And then you got the benefits and insurance and so forth. Property valuations, again, we know values are increasing in the market on residential. We're now 83% and growing in terms of residential valuation. On average single property tax bill, again, we see that we're 72 in the current year, out of one being the highest, which would be Weston, Massachusetts. The town of Weston would be number one, then your Carlisles and so forth up top. Chelmsford, again, we're 72 this year. We tend to be in the high 60s, low 70s. And then the slide I have, I did a comparison to our neighboring communities and shown over the last 5 years, the average single family property tax bill for Chelmsford was actually the lowest of the Greater Lowell comparable communities, Berwick, Tewksbury, Draycote, and Westford. Obviously, Tewksbury's rising the greatest, but I think Tewksbury took some of their sewer debt and moved it to their tax bill, which I think explains what's happening there, because they're certainly not voting debt, overrides or debt exclusions annually. I think they had a plan where they shifted some of their sewer debt to their property tax. State aid, again, at the time of this, the only time that we saw was the $188,000 increase in general government aid, and again, we'll add the 150 in Chapter 70. Those are the two big items. Everything else is minor when compared to those items, as you can see listed. Available funds on the next slide, local receipts. The thing to note there is half of local receipts are motor vehicle excise. John Souza sent out data to me last week that we've received the data file for what we call the first commitment, or the major motor vehicle excise tax billing, the one that people get every February from the town, for people who've owned a car for the past year or so, as opposed to what we call subsequent commitments, which are when somebody purchases or obtains a new vehicle during the course of a year. The first commitment, as we call it, or the main funding thing, which is $4.16 million this year, that amount came in $338,000 less, or 7.5% less than a year ago. That's not surprising, given the economic challenges from the pandemic, and given the fact that people are driving less from the pandemic. But obviously affects our line, which is why you'll note that when you look at recent years, it was at 5.6 at our peak in fiscal year 19, 5.6 million. Then last year it dropped to 5.3. And this year we're at 4.9. That's probably about where we're going to end up based on the trends that we're seeing. I'm hopeful that for the fiscal year that starts this July and goes through June of the subsequent year, that maybe that'll increase by $100,000 as we exit the pandemic. We shall see. Well, also, just so you know, on this, when the local receipts are submitted to the state with the tax setting, we have to get state approval on these numbers. So we just can't plug in a number like, oh, we think motor vehicle excise will be $6 million. The state actually approves the local receipt estimates that the town accountant submits along with all the town meeting votes for approval. So again, it's another area of state oversight. So we can't just plug in numbers. They look at data trends and market conditions. So again, my estimate at this point is we will have an increase in local receipts as best we know at this point in time. And obviously that will hopefully, not be finalized until next fall, and the state will approve it next December. Again, the other big drivers in that, additional to motor vehicle excise, the other big numbers are permits. You can see midway down, I highlighted in red, that's $1.1 million for permits. Obviously, it's down from the peak that we had in fiscal year 20, where it was 1.6 million. But if you go back years before that, you see in normal times, it's been around 1 million, 1.1 million. What can drive a permit on permits is really a large project. So for example, in 20, that was the Turnpike Road project. That occurred in that year. You have a huge development like that, it spikes your permits. Your meals tax, which is back towards the top of the rows, we're hopeful that will rebound. Again, our numbers, as John reported and Darlene reported 2 weeks ago, are trending well for this year and will exceed our 325 budget. Room and hotel tax, again, that's trending well, but certainly won't recover compared apparently to historic numbers. So I've got that at 300,000. The next slide is the available funds. I made reference to it. What are these other items in there? And again, it's the funding that goes with supplementary budgets, such as the sewer betterment fund that funds, which is the big number, that funds the debt service for those portions of the sewer project that were funded from betterments, that gets applied to the budget. You can see that's pretty constant, not much of a change there. And then the offsets for the enterprise funds for primarily benefits are what's going on there. The next slide is just inflation, just as an indicator, because it's something we keep an eye on. We saw a bit of a spike in 2018. Inflation was low in calendar year 20. We're a little nervous, quite frankly, what may align in the future as we come out of this pandemic, if there's increases in the minimum wage and shortage of supplies, but we'll have to wait and see. Just in closing, the capital plan, John Souza, our finance director, presented this to you at a previous meeting. It's $3.9 million. There's roughly $75,000 will come out of the child care fund for a project at the Westland School, of which the child care activities take place. So the net amount is $3.8 million. And then I once again repeat the summary that John provided in his presentation 2 weeks ago. And I'd note that attached to these files in the packet, if people want to see it, is the detailed list of all the items along with the descriptions, so that people have an idea of what's being brought forward. When the finance committee begins its hearings in the weeks ahead, they'll go through all that. And then I just close with a couple notes that I do every year in terms of how do we get out of this cycle of reliance on the property tax. Again, one of the issues is if the state keeps funding us at $30 per student, it's hard to do that in maintaining the essential service that we provide, which is education in the community. We mentioned earlier about the Chapter 90 roadway funding. Again, it's been $200 million. It hasn't increased in years, and it's really only about a third of what one would consider we would need to maintain our roads. And so therefore that drives in this budget, even though we don't fund it, the operating budget, we do fund it in capital for roadways, and also it's part of the DPW road repair budget for operations. And then again, just a closing note, as always, on OPEB reform. I doubt we'll see it, but it's the final slide that, the healthcare issues, excuse me, remain an issue because one can qualify for healthcare for life if you work for a municipality for a 10-year period at 20 or more hours per week, which is different than for pension. Your pension is based upon your total years of experience and your contributions. You get the same uniform health care regardless of your years of service or your income in retirement. So that's it as a summary for an overview of the operating budget. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the Finance Committee in February usually begins its hearings. I would expect that will happen soon. Again, in the next week, we'll see the governor's proposed budget and the cherry sheets, and I'll get those out to you and the Finance Committee and such when that data becomes available, again, probably next Wednesday. And then we're going to continue monitoring what's happening. The big unknown in all this is, will there be a stimulus package for municipal and state governments from the federal government? And I don't think we'll see that play out probably for a few months. And we don't know what manner, shape, or form that will be. So that's obviously not factored in here. So we will stay tuned on that and continue to adjust and keep you updated monthly as the revenue picture changes.
Paul, I had I didn't want to jump in on your presentation, but I had
No, that's fine.
Maybe 5 or 6 questions that, as I rolled through the following, 60 or so pages of numbers, that just popped out at me, and I was just wondering if maybe you could address.
Sure,
on page 29, it says, so on page 29, it talks about public safety, and there's one line in there that it jumps up, expenses jump up 8.4%.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as what triggered $100,000 of public safety expense there.
I can tell you what half of it is $50,000 is for an additional police vehicle. We're returning the funding for the police department vehicle replacement to 4 vehicles per year. This year we dropped it down to 3 because looking at the fleet and considering the pandemic and so forth, the chief felt comfortable we could get by with 3 cruiser replacements this year. when we sat down and looked at it for the upcoming year, the feeling was we need to go back and replace 4 vehicles. So half of that increase is the replacement of 4 cruisers. And believe it or not, the purchase and equipping of a cruiser right now is $50,000 per year. A couple of them just went on the road. We're now operating hybrid cruisers, the new Ford vehicle, police vehicle that's out there now. But by the time you re-equip the computers and the light bars and the painting and everything that goes into that, it's $50,000 per vehicle. So in the police line, the number goes up to $200,000 from $150,000 for vehicle replacement. So that's the big driver on that. It goes to $200,000. So that's really the bulk of the increase in terms of. And the other part is he had a $10,000 increase for the computer maintenance of the department has new computerized mobile systems, and the operational cost for that did increase with the new systems that went into effect. So that's incorporated into the budget. Those are really the things that are driving that.
All right, on the following page, on page 30, police department summary expenses.
Yep.
Is that a different? It says personnel expenses, and then there's another section, personnel expenses.
Yeah.
With 9.8 in there for another 70,000.
Yeah, that's the top page on 29 is a summary. Page 30 is a subset. The police department summary, even though they're labeled the same as public safety, the police department's a subset, and that's why that's 69,000. Again, it really goes back to the cruiser issue. Also, in the police department's budget, there's a separate budget for animal control, and that also is factored into that macro title of public safety. And then you also have the fire department. So yeah.
And then where on here do we see the fire department overtime budget?
That is on page 35. We're budgeting at $775,000 for overtime. And in speaking to the chief, that was a number he was comfortable with in terms of, at a funding level. Again, you have unknowns. We don't know how many structure fires you'll have, how many incidents you'll have in terms of staffing due to major storms and so forth. But that's
so we
the
actually
number.
Had $1 million $1 million of overtime back in 2020.
Yeah. Now, again, sometimes what happens is the most important thing, look at the bottom of the page in terms of the total, because, for example, if we have significant turnover in staffing, and then you've got people at the fire academy, you're drawing more on your overtime budget, but you're having less from your full-time salary budget. So although we focus on an overtime line item, I really focus on the bottom number, which is what are we paying in personnel services for the department. And you can see back in 20, we spent 5.6 million. This year, coming up for 22, we're at 6.2 million. Some of that obviously is due to wage schedules increasing. But again,
I just thought that we had a conversation in last year about there was a huge surplus in the overtime budget for the fire department. But
this year it's only budgeted at 795, so it's only a $20,000 differential. But you can see our funding for full time goes up 70,000. So that's why it does fluctuate in terms of what can happen during the course of a particular year. And the other thing is, as much as we like to be able to plan retirements, we can't always, because a firefighter or police officer in Massachusetts has mandatory retirement at age 65, but they can, in those preceding years, decide when and whether to retire. Unfortunately, in some cases, we don't get enough advance notice, so we sometimes get caught short in terms of going through the process of getting the civil service list, doing the background checks, doing the interviews, doing the selection, then finding an academy, and then having that person, graduate from the academy and then be trained to go online. I mean, that can take half to 3/4 or almost a full year in some instances. So that explains why you have sometimes variability in those numbers.
And then, where would we see in this budget the legal fees that we?
Oh, sure. That would be, you go back to more closer to the beginning. That's on page
21, I believe.
21? Yeah, I know it's it's right under law department on 21. Where I level funded that at 175,000. The budget this year is 175. Back in fiscal 20, we spent 191. The year before that, we spent 161. Year before that, we spent 205. Year before that was 184. So again, I'm budgeting 22 as 175. It tends to fluctuate due to a couple things. One is if you're having labor actions, then you're obviously incurring some costs. You can have extraordinary increases due to litigation, and then you can have anomalies such as like a cable contract that comes up every 10 years or so, and then it takes some resources there. But right now, I've level funded that at 175. Looking at the year-to-date numbers that we saw from Darlene, we were within budget. We're at 6 months through the fiscal year about where we would expect to be. Some months like December tend to be quieter than other months, so we're okay at this point.
Okay. And then on page 42, we talked about the budget was level budget with no new hires.
Yeah.
But on 42, I see +2 for stormwater.
Yeah, but that's the issue with stormwater, and if you need stormwater is the enterprise fund. The budget I presented to you and we've gone through over is what's funded by the property tax levy. Enterprise funds, whether it's sewer, stormwater, cable access, childcare, and so forth, those are funded independently and they're separately accounted for. So, and just like the golf course and the forum, so that's not within the tax levy. What's going on with stormwater is we're into the third and final phase of the stormwater ramp up, and that is scheduled to take place in 22 and will take place, in the budget and also in the environmental world. The stormwater laws are now in place. The litigation that the city of Lowell and other communities chose to engage with has been resolved, and we're full bore. We now have mandatory stormwater requirements for testing and performance and so forth. And I doubt with the new administration in Washington, that's going to change anytime soon. So we're planning on implementing, and so that final phase was 2 more laborers. Basically, it's another work crew as part of the full stormwater division that we've ramped up over a multi-year period. But again, that doesn't affect tax. That affects the stormwater surcharge that's on the sewer bills.
Got it. But that 11 is where we're maxing out.
Yep, that's it.
11 employees. Okay.
Yep,
but do they go on our pension? And they do go on our pensions and health insurance, right?
Yeah. But interestingly enough, for OPEB purposes, we fund that from the fund revenue. So we actually when they set the sewer rates and the stormwater rates and so forth, there's a portion that goes in there that pays for the benefits for health insurance, for for OPEB and so forth, for the liability. They're funded,
so they're liability neutral.
Exactly, because they're meant to be a standalone entity.
All right. On page 47, I saw that they had parks and recreation, and it was grounds and maintenance. I know it's not a huge increase. Well, I mean, dollar-wise, it's not a big increase, but 50%. What are we taking care of that jumped us $5,000?
It's what we're better taken care of in terms of trying to address. One thing that helped us this year was the fact that the pandemic got people off of the fields, so we're able to actually go in there and do some work on the fields. And when we sat down with the public works director and the parks thing, it's like, give me a realistic budget in terms of what does it take to maintain the town common, maintain the grass fields that we have in areas, and that's a realistic budget. And again, we've sort of had the benefit right now of actually being able to invest in it because of the pandemic kept people off of the fields. And so what we want to do is keep those fields in good conditions. But that's really what's going on there. And you can see that number has grown over time because it's just an area that is just, it's in need, in terms of, having respectable
And it's a,
environment.
yeah, it's a tiny drop in the bucket,
Yep,
but it's
yep.
just where I just saw the rate increase. And then
Yep.
On page 63, why did the library electricity go through the roof?
You know what that is, and you saw it also in the school budget. The utilities mentioned. What's going on, believe it or not, is COVID related. We are not only installing new filters and replacing them more often, but we're also running and increasing the air exchange for health purposes. So what that's doing is, and we've been seeing it, and we sat with the library director and talking to the schools and so forth, is we've got functional equipment, but also with better filters and more air exchange, it's more costly. Now, important thing is it's more healthy, and even when the pandemic is beyond us, it will actually be a healthier environment in terms of people to be during a regular flu season or otherwise. So that's sort of a direct fallout from compliance with air exchanges per COVID.
Okay. Yeah, I did see the increase in our phone lines, and I assume that's from Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom, and we also centralized it to DP to information technology in terms of the consolidation of phone lines, Zoom calls, and so forth, copiers and such.
And then I noticed in your budget that in the past you had put money aside for town meeting warrant articles, and then this year I didn't see anything in there.
Yeah, because those we don't know. Other than we would right now I don't know what it is. For example, we haven't we know we got $10,000 for the community action program. That's still there. The for 10,000. The big one I don't know, and it's not listed, is what will we need for the HVAC upgrade in the work that we're doing now in the schools with that full assessment and upgrade. That will be known as we get closer to town meeting. We're about 50% way through that assessment. And talking to Dr. Lang, he's going to help as best he can if he's got funding available from the school side. I mean, that's really the critical thing. Plus also, we're promised, or the promise perhaps maybe of federal stimulus funds for return to school and air exchange and air handling and those systems for schools. And we believe that there might be some funding there. So the combination of finishing our assessment and doing repairs, as well as longer term investments, will result in a warrant article at the town meeting, some of which may be from the levy and some of which may be borrowed once that's clearer. But we're continuing that work, and that's the big one. There could be other minor ones that may pop up, but that's the big one.
Right. In the spring, don't we have 2 or 3 warrant articles for takings for land?
Yeah, but none of those would be funded. We have articles for street acceptances, for easements, and so forth, but generally there's no known cost in that, and generally we would fund that through the sidewalk and street budgets. What we get is the legal authority to do those takings. Right.
I think we already approved the turnaround for lead, right?
Right. We didn't appropriate money for that. That would come from the town's budget for street and road repairs and sidewalk improvements, and so forth.
Oh, that's what. Okay, so it would come out of that. All right.
Yep.
I think you hit on all my questions. I don't know if anybody else has any others.
I just have one question on thanks for the documents about the capital projects towards the end. I really appreciated that. And I noticed one for the Chelmsford High School boiler replacement. Does the state still have that program where they reimburse for roofs and boilers and windows?
Yes, they do. And we just completed the project for the Byham School roof, the portion, I'm sorry, South Row School roof,
right.
Small portion of it. And maybe I can have Gary jump in and talk about this. What we're finding is the administrative costs and compliance issues with the state for small projects is probably more burdensome and costly than it's worthwhile. And Gary, I know you got a strong opinion on this, would you share it, because we've lived it. Go ahead, Gary.
Sure. If we were changing from a style boiler that was obsolete or old to a newer style boiler, then it would definitely be well worth it to go to MSBA and pick up whatever percentage we could, 50%. where we're doing a 1-for-1 change of 21-year-old Eco boilers for new ones. The piping's basically the same, the venting's the same, so basically, the cost is the boilers, the cost is the reinstallation of the boilers, and by the time you put basically a project manager on board, which is required by them, you get an engineer involved, which is required by them, you end up really not making any more money by doing that.
Okay, fine. It's interesting. It's unfortunate, I guess, but
It is, and in larger jobs, again, it would be, and if, like I said, if we're going from, say, a old steam boiler to a 95% full modulating condensing boiler, then it'd be more than worth it. But we've passed those stages in all the schools over the years.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Paul,
All right, thank
where is, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
where is what you fund, like you fund the CCA utilities out of the town budget? Where is that?
That's under DPW public buildings. If you go to let me find the page on that. John, you can help me if you find it quicker than I do. It's under, Public Works.
Page 48, try that.
Yeah, so that, as the owner of the North Town Hall and the Center Town Hall, the CCA and so forth, we have a $30,000 building maintenance line that, goes to maintain those facilities so that the elevators work, the heating systems and so forth. If there were to be a request to support the operations of that facilities, then that would come in the form of a town meeting warrant article. In speaking to Susan, that may be something that Susan Gates, the CCA operator, that might be something you might see towards fall town meeting. At this point in time, there's no plans to see that facility being operational starting July, given the expectations with the coronavirus, probably not allowing us to back to normal till the fall. But those type of operational things in terms of operational support for the operations there would be a separate warrant article.
Okay. And so for like the CCA and the North Town Hall, has the town ever looked at the feasibility of those becoming like self-funded?
I mean, they self-fund their own operations. In other words,
Okay.
they fund their custodians, they fund their, electricity and so forth. But if we ask them to cover their overhead, it's not financially viable. You just couldn't do it.
Virginia, are you looking for like an enterprise fund?
Yeah, you just couldn't
Are you
do it.
looking to make them?
I'm not looking for anything. I'm just asking.
Yeah. No,
Have
you
we
just
ever looked at an enterprise fund or anything like that to see if there's a multi-year plan where they could eventually be converted to something like that?
I just don't see that as attainable given the shoestring budgets that they're operating on. I mean, as you hear from Susan Gates, they struggle just to pay their utility costs and custodian fees. But if we ask them to then almost be like a tenant with okay, well, you're going to cover the real cost of the buildings. I just don't see it in the near future. Perhaps if things change and they were much more active and more financially successful, that might change, but not in the foreseeable future.
Is the North Town Hall on the same financial model as the CCA?
Yeah, although they run a much more limited operation in a smaller building, so they've and usually we get a report annually of sort of their operations, but they're running in the black, but again, not with any considerable surpluses.
Okay. And then I had a question on the DPW page that starts on 41. And then there's a number of different, I'm assuming these are all accounting lines underneath DPW.
Yep.
But I was just curious. So for example, electricity, there's electricity for the highway department and electricity for the parks division. Is that because they're in different buildings, or do we just try to allocate?
No, they're in different buildings.
Electricity, okay.
Those are different buildings. The Parks building is over at Roberts Field, whereas the highway is at Alpha Road, so forth.
Okay. And if we have to do some type of remediation, I understand we're going to talk about this later, but like for 54 Richardson Road, for example, if there's a root cause that shows that we have to do something there, how does that get funded?
We'd have to, if it's significant, we'd have to go to town meeting to
Okay.
get that funding, and that's not factored in here at this point in time. If yeah, that would be a town meeting warrant article.
Okay, and I'm on page 39. There's an animal inspector with a salary of $1,000. Is that, I don't need, what is that?
That's the inspector of animals, which is it's currently and has traditionally been performed by the animal control officer, but that's
Okay.
the inspector of animals. You know,
So it's not
out.
the same as the animal control officer.
No, it's part of an inspections budget. Yeah.
Okay. And then my only other question was on your last couple of slides that you presented, where it seems like every year we talk about trying to change something at the state level with Chapter 70, with Chapter 90, or with the OPEB reform. Where do you see the likelihood of being able to do that over what kind of time period?
I'd say it's slim to none. And the two reasons.
Okay.
One is because of the economic challenges of the state of funding, it's not going to happen soon. Also, fiscal calendar year 22 will be a gubernatorial election, and you're likely not to see those type of changes going into an election cycle. It may come out of an election cycle if there were to be a radical change, and particularly in the governor's office. But I just don't see that on the immediate horizon. But it doesn't mean we don't continue to address the concerns. Particularly Chapter 90. I mean, that's been a perennial call. I think what the problem there is, and you're starting to see some talk about it even now at the federal level, that the days of probably the gas tax being the funding source for road maintenance are probably nearing an end as we convert from gasoline powered vehicles. So, I just think that that's probably a hill that's going to be climbed in a different form on another day, where you're going to see probably a miles driven type of tax as opposed to a gasoline tax. But it just happens if the schedules for converting to electric and so forth are going to be achieved, then you're going to see your gas tax revenue, just not be a viable source long term. Those debates haven't started yet, but they're certainly, you can see them on the horizon.
So I know there's no easy answers, but that would then lead me to what can we do that's within our control if this is like a long-term view we want to take?
I think, and I kind of mentioned at the end of the meeting the other night, is that they're having been in this business for over 30 years. The notion of a partnership or revenue sharing with the state is become less and less defined.
Mm-hmm.
Governor Baker, as I noted earlier, he has tended to fund the unrestricted general government aid, the growth of the state budget, his budget. However, he's not even done half of that funding level for Chapter 70 educational aid. Governor Patrick was the opposite, who was previously Governor Baker. He funded Chapter 70 and yet tended to not fund the unrestricted general government aid. The bottom line is, if you put them all together, the amount of revenue sharing from the state to cities and towns isn't keeping pace with the cost of municipal government. As you know, there is sort of this proposal of this surcharge of millionaires tax or whatever. That's probably going to be some dynamic that's put into play in either 22 or 24 in terms of this whole idea that there's a recognition that the state needs to increase its funding for infrastructure, particularly transportation and education and so forth. And that's probably the debate that's going to ensue in a couple of years, in 2 years or so, when that prospect comes forward. But in short term, I don't see anything. I think the issue, and we sort of touched upon it, what you're going to see probably within the year is the whole issue of redistricting. And that may have more of an impact in terms of what happens in terms of the composition of the legislature, and certainly in Chelmsford's case, who's representing the town of Chelmsford.
Right, but so where I was going with this, Paul, is
Yep.
we've just said this is what we should do, but the likelihood is slim to none.
Yeah.
And it's very much outside of our control.
Yeah.
And so where I'm going with this is, are there, and I know there's no answer today, but should we start thinking more in terms of what kinds of changes or challenges can we put on ourselves that help us become less reliant on the state?
Yeah, I mean, some
You know,
of that, yeah, and some of that is.
Does it help as we start to fill the empty 129 buildings and lots? I don't know, but what do we do that's more within our control here in Chelmsford? Because we've said the state reliance is a problem, and we're probably not going to be able to fix it, and it's going to change depending on who's in office. So, you know, is there some thinking that we could start doing to say, well, what could we do that puts us in a stronger position without relying on the frustration that we have in terms of our state aid?
I mean, I think the thoughts on that is more local autonomy. I mean, for example, a decade ago, the state gave us the ability to do a local option meals tax, which we utilize. They gave the local option, increased the rooms tax, which we utilized. You know, those are the type of things, and again, there have been increased amounts, for example, you know, but the legislature hasn't, you know, I mean, it may come down to the whole question of funding. You know, in terms of, is the property tax the appropriate funding source permanently? And that's, I think that may come into discussion. Again, it's not a local thing we can control, but that's really, you know, as you said, that's driving 3/4 of our budget in terms of covering it. And then, but we realize that that's not oftentimes the most equitable tax. So I think the only thing we can do is keep, you know, communicating with our legislative delegation and the governor's office and so forth, that, you know, we're not being supported, or we don't have the tools to be self-sufficient. You know, you would have to, it wonders what the long-term, I think you're going to see a period of change. Again, you're going to see it in transportation. You're probably going to see it in terms of funding in general. You know, if you look at other parts of the country, they don't rely on the property tax as much as New England does or Massachusetts does. You know, if you go to places like New York City, or you go to places in the Midwest and so forth, I mean, you know, there's a local income tax. You know, and not saying that's the answer. I'm not saying they're trying to be a tax, you know, hawk, but the bottom line is, you know, is the continued reliance on the property tax the long-term, you know, path forward for funding local government? I think you're going to see within the next generation, you're going to see those type of issues come to the forefront in this world of discussion. And I think the same way you're seeing this discussion at the state and federal level in terms of pandemic response and pandemic funding and so forth. You know, what burden is the states, what burden is the federal, and then what burden is the local in terms of sustainable communities going forward, and the whole issues of equity and so forth, in terms of, you know, who knows? You know, but I think, I think we got to realize that we continue to live basically on the past precedent. And at some point, I think, you know, there may be some discussions in terms of, you know, is this the best path going forward long-term? You know, not an immediate change, not an immediate pivot, but, you know, I mean, for example, the governor just got his housing choice legislation. He's committed, and they've lessened the rules to housing production in the state. I mean, bylaws can now be changed by a simple majority, as opposed to a 2/3 majority for multifamily housing, accessory apartments, and other types of zoning. Again, with if those type of actions take place, you're going to see pressures that come with those that I think are going to start opening up these questions to longer term discussion in terms of, you know, how does a community support itself? You know, Chelmsford's fortunate in some respects where it's a middle class community, but there are other communities that are hurting, and I think you're going to keep hearing more and more about that. in the weeks and years that come ahead in terms of what is the long-term funding, strategy for local government. It'd be interesting to see.
Any other questions for Paul?
Well, thank you. And again, I'll keep you updated as the budget process moves along.
All right, so from that,
You need a vote, Paul?
No, it's
Okay.
just a submittal. The charter just requires me to submit the budget. The vote actually from the select board would take place in April.
Okay.
Whatever the board is at that time would then make its recommendations to town meeting. And then again, finance committee will make its recommendations to town meeting, at the time town meeting gathers as well.
and that's, you're done, right, Paul? I noticed this project detail sheets, but were you anticipating going through those tonight or you're?
No, like I said, I just want you to have them. That was completed back in December with the capital plan committee.
Yep.
And again, finance committee will go through those. And then again, town meeting will have that book information as well.
Okay. With that, we'll move into reports and presentations, correct? Okay. I'm going to ask Phil Hitz to join us. He's on, and we have a presentation from the Diversity Committee report. Phil, I'm going to let you take it over.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Ken, and thanks, members of the board. Appreciate you giving me an opportunity to give you a bit of an update. Just want to kind of let you folks know what's been going on with the committee since we started. We're at this point, we're a group of 13 individuals, residents from the town of Chelmsford. It's a diverse group in terms of age, background, and also in ideas about diversity and how to move forward with that. The other thing I want to mention about our group, which makes it a little bit different, is that of the individuals on the team or on the committee, only 2 of them have had previous municipal board or committee experience. So the rest of us are newbies that are essentially feeling our way through and understanding, protocols and so forth of how the work's done. But, we have been challenging. Everybody's committed to trying to get that done. One of the, I think, things that, was really clear to us when we, started the work is that, and it sounds fairly obvious, but that this is a new group. So there was no committee in existence prior to us coming together doing similar work. So without a blueprint, we needed to go out and try to see what other groups were doing, do some research on what types of efforts we might want to undertake, and at the same time build consensus among ourselves as to the best way to move forward and do the kind of work that we're trying to do. I'm happy to say that we met that challenge directly and are doing pretty well on it. One of the things I wanted to do today is just go over some of the things that we've completed so far and just kind of walk you through some of those and give you an idea of some of the things that are on the horizon. I feel good about what we've done so far, and I'll review some of those things now. First and foremost, we put together a mission statement, which, as you obviously know, working on mission statements and getting things together to go in the direction that you want, can be somewhat challenging. We feel good about it in that I think it captures what we believe the focus ought to be of this work, and it also speaks well to the town. And just let me digress for a minute. My understanding is that you folks have seen the attachment to your agenda. So that's why I'm not reading through any of this. And, I'm sure you have an opportunity to do all that. So I'm not going to read the mission statement or anything like that. But we've had the opportunity to complete that. In addition to that, we also completed our proclamation on anti-racism, hatred, and discrimination. And it was something that we certainly wanted to take this opportunity to present to the board as well. What we're trying to do clearly is to make sure that we're building some momentum for the work that we're doing. This is all work that is certainly worthwhile. It's not anything that we believe anyone doesn't support. So again, we wanted to make sure that we brought it to the select board, give you folks an opportunity to review it, and hopefully you'll be signing that. We would ask you to sign the proclamation. In kind of partnership with that, we also created the anti-racism and hatred pledge. And this is actually a document, or really, it's less of a document, more of an opportunity for those in the committee or those in the community, excuse me, to demonstrate their support for the work that we're doing. So it gives them an option or an opportunity to sign on and say to us, hey, we support, standing up, against racism and hatred and discrimination against the difference of all kinds, and supporting diversity and inclusion. So that's another one of our accomplishments over time. I think the other one that's a big one that we can certainly point people to is our diversity webpage. It's on the town of Chelmsford's the website for the town of Chelmsford, and our webpage is there. It's where we're trying to push all of the information about the work that we're doing, about any of the links that we've made with other communities around this work, and anything that we think is going to be of interest to the town, we're going to be grabbing and putting on that particular webpage. As a special feature for the intro of the webpage itself, we have one of our members, actually Vice Chair Latasha Dixon, who's on a short video that you can access on the website, on the webpage that is, that outlines the kind of history behind Black History Month as a way to launch Black History Month, and also some specific information around the website, our diversity website, and diversity calendar that we have. On the diversity calendar, it will be featuring a different notable African American for every day of the week, so to speak. So each day there'll be a different profile on someone who might be from the artist community, or someone who's a scientist, or someone who's an inventor. Again, a way of celebrating Black History Month, and also educating people in the town about these notable Americans. So that information will be on the website as well. And as I mentioned before, any other work that we end up doing with different groups in the town that will tie into the overall theme of diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and anti-hatred, we want to make sure that that info is there and people can access it. So that's really an important piece. As we look at the Black History Month celebration, in addition to the things that we'll be doing with our calendar, we're also working to identify some potential art-related activities, and we'll be using the Chelmsford Telemedia services to try to publicize those. We haven't gotten them all nailed down yet, but we hope to do that pretty soon, and we want to make sure that people have an opportunity. Again, go to the website, see what's going on, and also once we get to rolling out these activities and letting folks know where they are, making sure we have those links available online. So that's another area that we're looking at. In addition to those things, we've also been working to reach out to different groups within the town and to ultimately build relationships with those different organizations. So far, we've had the meetings with the Chelmsford Town HR Director, who's been to our meetings to talk with us on some issues. We had Chief Spinney with us just last week, and I believe we have the business director, business development director is scheduled to visit within the next couple of weeks. So again, we're doing that work. On top of that, we've even established contacts with folks from the Chelmsford Public Library, the Chelmsford Public School System, and we're making sure that they know who we are, and we're starting to again build ways of having continued conversations with those groups. So in what I believe is just a short period of time, we've done a fair amount, and just wanted to have an opportunity to share that information with the group. We continue to look at different types of goals, different types of things that we may be doing as it relates to the town. And as we make more progress on those things, we'll be certainly rolling those out. Again, we send people to our website and to the, I'm sorry, I keep calling it website, but it's actually the web page on the town's website, and you'll be able to get information, more information on us from there. So any questions on any of that?
Phil, yeah, I have a couple of questions, Pat Wojcik. On what you're doing right now, you're obviously focusing on the anti-racism and discrimination. Do you have any? I happened to be at a seminar last Friday where they were talking about this, and they said one of the things that's important is to have some way to measure your success. Have you thought about that at all? I don't know how you would do that, quite frankly, but I don't know if your committee has thought about that at all.
No, I think that's great. I think at a very high level, I think people are aware that needs to be done. We don't have any specific plans at this point in time around how to do that. I think that's an important piece that we need to do, and definitely we'll make sure that kind of stays on the forefront of the team. At this point, what we're trying to do is really to get some momentum for the group. I mean, we haven't been around for a while. We're trying to get things moving, and so identify some efforts that we can initiate, and hopefully there'll be things that can build up on themselves. But you make a great point. We do need to at some point talk about how do we measure what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I guess the other thing, it probably is more directed towards my colleagues on the board. Your committee right now, I believe it's an ad hoc committee and your appointments expire June 30th, I believe.
Right, yeah,
so,
that's my understanding, yep.
Right, so, and we can, maybe put this on the agenda and talk about it in a few months when it comes time for reappointments, but I think this is a committee based on their work and, what they're trying to cover and other things that they could expand their reach to as far as other forms of discrimination, making this committee permanent and making it more formal, maybe having a set number, a 7 or a 9, like most of our other committees, and having, staggered 3-year terms. Like I said, I don't think that we need to decide that tonight, but I think it's something that we should consider, because these issues are not going to go away.
That's true. I would agree.
If I could just build off of something Pat just said. First of all, I applaud the effort you guys have put in. I don't know of any other committee that started meeting once a week consistently from the time it was formed. Hats off to you. And I think some of the things that you've talked about, even in the planning for Black History Month, are terrific from an educational standpoint for the community. When we started this conversation over the summer in the listening session, it was, I guess, inspired by our reactions and our community reactions to some of the horrific events in the country related to racism. When we put the committee together, the diversity and inclusion piece, I think, at least long-term, we envisioned would extend beyond anti-racism. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But like, for example, I attended the MIAA 1-hour training on diversity and inclusion. And there are, aspects of diversity that include the legal parameters that companies and organizations are measured against, like age, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical attributes. But then this whole idea of diversity and inclusion extends even far beyond that to just valuing people for who they are, whether they have different learning styles, different religious backgrounds, different experiences, altogether. And I think, I know that some of your committee comes from various backgrounds, and some of you have stronger backgrounds in this area than others. And I'm just wondering if it would be helpful, or if you would be willing, if like Paul could get you access to this training, because I think it was recorded when I took it. But it might just be like a good education too for the committee. And if I stop talking for a minute, my question would be, have you thought about where you go next from the anti-racism focus, or did your committee come to that was kind of your focus for the near term?
Well, I think just to kind of pick up on something that you had said was that we were responding in much the same way the board responded to the activities of this summer. And we're looking at those activities, and those were in large part are a driver for some of our activity. Having said that, I'd remind people that the name of the committee is the Diversity, Racial Equity, and Inclusion piece. So we're not really focused on just one piece or another, even though it might seem that way because of maybe timing. And now we're talking about Black History Month. We've also got plans to celebrate other types of difference as well. So I think your point about valuing all differences is the appropriate one. That's the right thing, and that's ultimately what we need to be doing. As it when you talk about the training piece and making that available to people on our committee, I'm sure if there were any sorts of training that we thought we could utilize and that the town would provide, we happily avail ourselves of that training. But I guess to be candid, we haven't really looked terribly broadly at this point to say what are we going to do exactly next after we get here. We're kind of looking at how do we get rolling. So we've been kind of focusing on our activities on how to connect with other groups in town, how to get people to know that we exist, how to get people to learn more about us and learn more about what we're doing and what our mission statement is and get more involved with us. So that's kind of where the focus has been, but we can certainly look at broadening it. This work is big, it's big, broad work anyway.
It's huge.
And it's so hard to get your arms around it. I mean, I hate to kind of talk with my hands, but I think about it, and it is difficult to get your arms around.
And I would also, just food for thought, flip what I said. If you as a committee think that there is, training or something else that the town or the town employees or its appointed boards should do, we've talked about that in the past as a board too. I think we would, welcome that kind of feedback.
I
don't want to speak for everybody, but I would welcome that kind of feedback. And I know, like, the town of Lexington is looking at things like that. How do we? Verna Myers says, and I just love it. Diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to the dance, right? So it's the inclusion part is how do you give everybody a voice and respectful of race, gender, background, experience, or whatever. And I know that's a huge scope, but I just wanted to see if you had thought all about that in your future.
Yeah, Latosha unmuted, so she's going to jump in now, if you don't mind.
Yes, this is Latasha Dixon. I just want to also add to the fact that on our webpage, we also have a calendar that has an enormous amount of diversity related events throughout the calendar year. We didn't focus just on race.
Yeah, I saw that.
Every aspect of diversity as possible. So that is available for the general public. And that's going to help this committee and future committees actually build programs so that it seems more inclusive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like that idea very much. The last one that Letitia just brought up about showing some examples of different things. And I want to commend the chairman, because I've watched a few of the meetings, and I think he runs a very nice meeting. My concern is that we got started off on the wrong foot, I think, and I don't want to go back and reiterate whatever happened. We'll just say it happened and come forward. And I think so. It's very important, and I think the fact that you're going to be, during Black History Month, you'll be, honoring, some of the great people of the race who have done wonderful things for the country. And I think we can learn can all learn together. And instead of coming out and accusing people of maybe maybe having some of this stuff, maybe not, I don't know how to put it in words without saying, how to have some of this being more prevalent than it really is in town. I mean, I've lived here my whole life, and but I'm sure, I don't know if I just went off the air or not. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you, George.
Okay, so I think it's a wonderful idea, and I'm all for it, and I think Mr. King is doing a good job as a chair, and I like the idea of education, and we're getting together in a very peaceful manner, and so I just hope that's the way it continues. And I do think, like Pat said, it may be a little early to sign a proclamation, but that's up to the rest of the board. Thank you.
I didn't say that. I didn't say anything about the proclamation.
I thought that's what I thought I heard, Pat. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't mention the
You said
proclamation.
you'd take a little bit more time and okay, whatever.
Yeah, I just said
You didn't say that.
before we decide what to do moving forward with this committee, because this committee is scheduled to disband in June, and
Well,
I
guess I interpreted that the wrong way, but
Okay.
Anyway.
So we have, yep, thanks, George. Pat Doris just also logged in, and she's unmuted, so I'm going to assume she wants to say something. Pat, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to mention that the proclamation is kind of an important part of our kickoff of the launch of our work. And since it is a select board committee, we just thought that it would be a really good idea if, in order for us to start our work, that we got the full support of the board in the form of this very beautiful and emphatic proclamation to the community that we are against racism and discrimination and hatred. So I would like to ask the board to read the proclamation if you're prepared to make that commitment at this time.
mean, I would be okay. I just have one question about the proclamation, but I don't know if we're going to read it and I could ask afterwards, or you want me to ask the question first?
Yeah, ask the question, please.
Okay, do you have the proclamation in front of you?
I actually don't, but I can look over at
Well, I can just tell you what, there's one phrase under one of the therefores that says, we promise to better understand and acknowledge those privileges we enjoy while others do not. Who does that refer to? Who's the we and who's the others?
Yeah, I didn't understand that either.
Well, and actually, maybe Latasha, could you maybe explain that statement a little bit?
Yes, the most common interpretation of that is white privilege, because there are some inherent privileges that are applied, that are just known, that are commonplace, where someone of another race, someone of another ethnicity may not be treated in the same manner. So being aware that you have a different set of privileges than someone else can just help you be able to speak up on someone's behalf if you see them being mistreated in public.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm still kind of confused about the use of the word "we" there. Do you mean we, the board members?
Well, yes, I mean, as right now, our 5 board members, our 4 board members are all white, so.
Right, I understand that, yeah.
So that would be you as the 4 of you saying that, yes, as white people, we recognize that we were born with privileges that others didn't have. So it is a very validating way to commit to anti-racism. I mean, it's just it's a statement that would very clearly tell the community that we recognize that we have opportunities just implicitly because we're white.
Okay, I mean, I guess maybe I would question it because I guess we were supposed to be signing the proclamation for the entire town of Chelmsford, and we know the entire town of Chelmsford is not entirely white.
Actually, no, you're signing it as the select board. And then in the last paragraph, you're encouraging the community to also join in the same sentiment with their words and actions and in their business community, in their churches and things like that. So that last paragraph of the proclamation invites the community to also join that momentum. That's where the individual pledge comes in. And we have that individual pledge that we would ask individuals to join in, and so that they show their support for anti-racism and hatred as well.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Thank you.
So I had a couple other questions. I'm sorry. Where we talk about enforcing in all departments of the town of Chelmsford, we don't have that authority. And where the last paragraph, I didn't really read as encouragement. I read it as exercising another authority that we don't have. You know,
Well,
we can influence, but we don't have the authority to enforce anything in the departments in the town of Chelmsford.
Is the word enforce in there, Virginia?
Yes, it is.
It is? Okay, well then we can take that word out.
And the last paragraph, you know, says we hereby submit that this list of people must engage in similar commitments. We can't.
All right, well, this was drafted.
Enforce that.
This was drafted, and again, there's 13 of us and only 2 of us have been on committees, and this was drafted based on, I think, a mayor wrote this. So you're right, there are words in there that wouldn't be appropriate for the Board of Selectmen, and we certainly would welcome those edits where it would be more directing you to, as in other proclamations, encouraging.
And I was also wondering how you would feel about a proclamation that instead of condemning things, articulated what we stand for and what we're promoting. A more positive proclamation.
Right. And honestly, Virginia, I think that's the next step. But first, we have to take a stand against some of the things that caused a lot of the problems that we saw over the summer. And the committee voted and agreed on that. So, I mean, I really do think that you start positive change by standing up against all of the negatives that exist. And that's just the direction that we had decided to take. If the board doesn't feel strongly enough about that, we can go back and I would definitely welcome your edits. But I really do feel that standing against racism and hatred is an important first step to making those positive changes.
So that was a thoughtful, deliberate thing that the committee came to, that's what you want this folk. And I'm just trying to get clarity because
I'll defer to the chairman and the vice chairman.
If that's the answer, that's okay. I would like, and I think I would like an opportunity to just kind of tweak some of this, but go ahead, Ken.
From my perspective, if the board wants to spend more time with the document, feel free to do so. We can edit it. again, one of the things that we were doing and that we do going forward is to look at those items that we feel, are most important and the kinds of things that we need support for. Let's not kid ourselves on this board. Let's not, play any games around this stuff. We know why this exists. We know why we're here. We know why we were created. And what we're trying to do is in a thoughtful, meaningful way, come up with some approach, some way for us to all say, okay, so we've got this group, we've got this committee, we want them to be successful. How do we let the rest of the community know that we're behind them and we support the work that they're doing? So, and that was, the intent largely behind us coming up with a proclamation. This idea of doing something like that, something like this isn't new at all. And probably, you may all know of other communities who have done similar sorts of things, but there are a number of communities who have done similar sorts of things. And, they've seen it as a positive. So we were hoping that the same would be the case, here in Chelmsford. So that was our intent, certainly not looking to, create any, additional controversy. At the same time, if there's information that you believe we need to have, if you'd like to make some edits and we need to be aware of that and be, working with you more closely as we try to pursue something like that, I believe the board would, or the committee would certainly welcome that.
Mr. Hicks, again, I applaud you because I watched you and I like the way you handle your meetings. I just like to say, that my son and my wife had a business before the COVID that was doing fairly well in the Greater Lawrence area. And we had about 12 employees, and half of those employees were people they were, black people. Okay. If I'm saying something out of, I don't mean it that way. I just want to say these people were the nicest people I had. We treated them well. They used to come and have dinner at our house. We have a cookout at the house on an off day. And we got along nobody felt that they were better than anybody else or less than anybody else. So, sometimes people get offended when and it's not done intentionally, I'm sure. But when you say they weight privilege, there are a lot of people that would never take advantage of something like that. A lot of people I've grown up with, through sports and what have you. I participated with a lot of different races and types of, and never really had a problem with any of them. So it's new for me, to be very honest with you. So I'm not trying to put anything down. I agree that maybe we should just look at this a little harder and maybe if you want to really put something together, give us some time to work on it with you.
May I add a different perspective?
Sure.
So the example that I gave was about white privilege, but this proclamation is also for discrimination and hatred. So there are those of us that are able-bodied who are able to walk, yet there are those that are unable to walk. They're in a wheelchair. They're considered physically disabled. So there is a majority that's a we, and then there is an us. So that's a different example. There's hearing impaired. That's a physical disability. Many of us do have the ability to hear, but there are those that don't. So there's another example of we and us. So please just don't get so focused on the racism portion of this proclamation. Also think about other areas where there are differences between us.
No problem with me. Nobody appreciates, especially what I just went through, and didn't want to bring it up, but I came within a fraction of an inch of probably being paralyzed for the rest of my life. And I got up And believe me, I haven't stopped praying since. And nobody could be more appreciative of a lot of things in life right now than I am. And I
I'm
thank
sorry
God
to
every
hear
night.
that, but I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm not saying that for any particular reason. It could have gone either way. And I would have had to accept it. But I do see how lucky I am. And I'm thankful for it. And I hope to give as much back as I can because I got to break. You know what I mean? So, and again, that sounds kind of corny, but it's not. It's the truth. That's just how I feel. So, I'm hoping that we all work together because Chelmsford is a beautiful town. And I've lived here for 74 years. My family's been here 130 years. And I never had that many, and we fought a lot of things. It wasn't just race, it was religion. It was other ethnic groups, but you know, it wasn't black and white. It was Italian and Irish. It was Protestant Catholic. It was so many different things. It was the English against the Irish when they were running all the mills in town. I grew up in North Chelmsford, and everybody that lived in North Chelmsford worked in the mills, and they worked very, very hard for the money they earned. So that's all I'm trying to say. You know, I mean, I appreciate your movement and your time you're putting in, and you're working every week, and that's a lot. It's a lot of time to give up. So I respect that, and I just hope that we all work together and things work out. Thank you.
Thanks, George. So I think it was great to have you on tonight, especially where February kicks off Black History Month. And I think it was a great way to, bring your committee in front of the board. And with that being said, I really haven't said too much, but, listening to the sort of conversation here, what's the board's feeling on this proclamation? Do you want to approve it tonight? You want to take it and edit it? Where are we going with this?
Well, the committee offered to let us edit it and have them resubmit it. I think we should take them up on that and submit, thoughts to them about things that we think could be worded better, could be something that all of us would be comfortable with.
So should we send comments to Phil or to whom?
Maybe you should have a joint meeting.
We could have a joint meeting. I mean, we either have to individually send comments to someone on the committee, or we have to schedule a meeting to deliberate.
Well, I think we should
you could individually send the comments to me, and I could summarize them and send them off to Phil.
I think we should send them to Phil. I don't think you should have a clearinghouse, be a clearinghouse. I don't see a problem with sending them directly to Phil.
Yeah, no, that works. I mean, that if that's the decision, that works. Then I can review it with the committee, and then we can bring it back, for a second review and approval.
By when would you like the comments, Phil?
There's no. I'm just trying to be realistic and think about
within the week. Is that okay?
Sure.
It would be.
Why don't we make it easy and say by a week from today?
Is that okay with the rest of the board?
Yeah, I'll ask my colleagues online and see if that works for them.
Yeah, I think that'll be great. It's just Virginia, as of, we're going to be meeting tomorrow night.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say within 24 hours.
And then, but then we're going to start meeting every other week instead of every week.
Okay.
So I'm trying to back off a little bit now that we've got our launch going. So maybe by our next meeting, which is.
Well, if we get them to Phil by a week from today, that gives you time to work with it before your next meeting.
That would be great. Yeah.
Right. Does that work for you, Natasha?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
We did have one outstanding question and that we didn't get an answer to from the committee. And just a quick one, was it the committees? Did you have a conversation to put the words? I mean, the comments were made that you wanted to make a stand, which I appreciate, and you wanted it to be clear, and you wanted to be anti-racism on the first proclamation. Was that a conversation that was had that was your starting point? And I think I understand what you were doing, but I just want to, nobody answered the question when that was asked.
When you say, was that our starting point? I guess I'm not.
Well, was it a conversation the committee had as far as, Trish, you're shaking your head no.
Yeah,
I don't recall that being a conversation that we had during one of our meetings.
Right.
I think for us, we were pulling from different resources what other towns have done, and we found this proclamation, and we thought it was a very good starting point, and that is where we started off.
Fair.
We did do some edits internally in our meeting too. We did edit the first draft, and so we kind of, you know, fine-tuned it a little bit within our committee. But it was just something that we put together based on other communities.
Paul, do you have any other comments or things you think we should consider?
No, I would just offer the suggestion that you referenced earlier, that if there's some training or resources that the committee feels that they need to assist their efforts, and I'm willing to help and facilitate towards that end. And also, again, if they have any suggestions for training or efforts that we should do as the town, operations and administration, I'd welcome that response from the committee. I just applaud what they're doing so far, and stand by, willing to assist and also to learn.
Great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kenny.
All right, so that's where we'll leave it with you, Phil. We'll any comments we'll have to you by a week from tonight, and allow you time to edit this and come back to us.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Phil. All right, next up is our LSP reports.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got Gary Perschetti, Steve Yonley, and Paul McKinley from Weston and Sampson on the call now, coming into the picture, and we'll give you an update on how things are progressing regarding the situation with the PFAS at 54 Richardson Road at the former highway yard. I'll turn it over to Steve at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'll turn it right over to Paul McKinley from our LSP from Weston and Sampson. He can give the board an update on where we're at this point.
Yeah, good evening. Again, Paul McKinley. I'm an LSP with Weston and Sampson, and Steve asked me if just to give you an overview, 5 minutes, rundown of what occurred, where we're at, and where we're going with the 54 Richardson Road. So just to sort of start from the top, town personnel sampled 3 existing monitoring wells out at 54 Richardson Road in October and November. And the results of those sampling events identified PFAS. I don't know if folks are familiar with PFAS. PFAS is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There's many of them. They're sort of abbreviated as PFAS. You see them on the news, oftentimes reported as forever chemicals. They're very persistent compounds, and they represent a potential adverse health effects to people and the environment, and given their toxicity and their persistence, the very low levels are what we look for in these PFAS compounds. Again, the PFAS was detected. It was above the standards promulgated by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. The standard, the maximum contaminant level, or the permissible standard in groundwater is 20 parts per trillion. So very, very low. Oftentimes in soil, we measure parts per million, or groundwater parts per billion, but in PFAS, they're measuring at a parts per trillion level. The levels that were detected, there's 3 monitoring wells there. The highest so far was a sampling event that actually we conducted in January, about 2 weeks back, January 11th, and we detected 657 parts per trillion in monitoring well 1. That's, you know, obviously well over the standard of 20. So the significance of that is you know, the North Chelmsford Water District wells are, you know, approximately 700 feet in a down gradient direction, or inferred down gradient direction from information we have available thus far. So with those levels, you know, they're obviously a concern. Mass DEP, Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, was contacted, and they actually considered this condition what's called a condition of substantial release migration, or SRM. And what that means is that these compounds are detected in a public water supply well, and therefore what's called an immediate response action was triggered. So they considered this a 72-hour notification. Our notification date was December 11th, 2020. So all sort of our regulatory deadlines are calculated from there. So it was reported. So the DEP has issued what's called a release tracking number, or it's basically a case ID to this. It's 3-36649, and deadlines again are calculated from that December 11th notification date. And so we're initiating what's called a assessment only immediate response action. So we're investigating, you know, where's this PFAS coming from? Where's it going? You know, how is it affecting receptors? And again, you know, primary receptor, or the North Chelmsford Water District public supply wells. And so we're in the midst of conducting investigation of existing, sort of coalescing all of the existing information that we can glean. Mr. Harper from the North Chelmsford Water District has been cooperative in providing some information so we can, you know, advance our hydrogeologic investigation. And as part of that, again, we resampled the wells on January 11th, and the concentrations are they're increasing slightly, and that's part of the assessment. As we'll evaluate why that is. Maybe it's just sampling methodology or some seasonal fluctuations, but we'll look at that as part of the overall investigation. So our deadline's coming up. We owe a what's called an immediate response action plan to DEP on February 9th, 60 days from notification. And that plan will include how we will evaluate or further assess the presence of PFAS, both on the 54 Richardson Road property, and look at other potential sources of this contaminant. So that's, you know, one of our primary focuses is really to identify the source, where it's coming from, and then, you know, further down the road, look at how it's affecting receptors such as the North Chelmsford Water District wells. So I guess with that, is there any questions or any more detail you'd like? I guess I wanted to keep it high level to start, but certainly willing to take some questions.
So what you submit on February 9th to the DEP is a plan for how to find the source?
Absolutely. So what they've asked for is a plan. So the plan will go to DEP. DEP has 21 days to review and approve or comment on it. And primarily it's going to include additional monitoring wells. So there's 3 sort of older monitoring wells on the property. That well network really needs to be expanded to really further assess both, you know, the hydrology, which way groundwater is flowing, and try and pinpoint where these PFAS chemicals are coming from, whether it be 54 Richardson Road, potentially offsite, really sort of focus in on how this compound came to be, and then where it's migrating and how it's potentially affecting receptors, again, such as, you know, streams, the North Chelmsford Water District wells.
So I was just what you're saying is the methodology that you apply to figure out where the source is to drill more wells. Is that?
So
what I understood.
there's that. So currently, what we're doing is in the 60-day period is really obtaining all existing information that we have. So we're looking at some boring logs and from the wells across the street, looking at offsite sources like other uses of properties in the area that could contribute to this PFAS contamination that we're seeing. I'm taking all that information, looking at potential sources, both on site on the 54 Richardson Road property, offsite, and really look at put together a program as to how to evaluate and identify where the source of contaminants are. So we're looking at historical pieces of information, Sanborn fire insurance maps, aerial photography, city directories to see what commercial uses might have happened in the area, all to really focus in and target a sampling program. So it's both the wells, where we want to put the wells, the depth we want to screen them. Some of the wells from North Chelmsford Water District are in bedrock. So are we drilling bedrock wells or just in the overburden? And then how do we sample the wells? That's part of the sampling plan as well. What we're sampling for, how frequently, the methodology, what the laboratory analyzed for, all of that goes into a plan that'll be submitted to DEP for their review and approval.
Thank you.
Is this happening anywhere else in the town?
I will say from experience, I haven't actually looked and seen how many PFAS sites are in town-wide. We've only looked at proximity to the site in the general area. So we do a search. It's about, there's various search distances, but basically about a mile out is one of the a common search radius for some of the sources. So we've looked, and from our preliminary search, it doesn't look like there are any PFAS sources in close proximity that are known. So previously reported releases of PFAS to Mass DEP, we're not seeing anything in close proximity, if that answers your question.
No, thank you. Let me ask you one more question. If you lived in that area, how concerned would you be regarding your drinking water?
So I understand from discussions with Mr. Harper, and he sent some data over that the concentrations in the wells, there is treatment on the wells. Presently, they've got carbon, granule activated carbon, that was actually predating the identification of PFAS. But that and blending, I actually had a conversation with Mr. Harper today, and I understand that the blended water from a combination of the deeper bedrock wells, which have lower PFAS concentration, with the gravel pack on the upper, and when they mix that together, the influent contaminant pre-treatment is actually below the Mass DEP standard of 20 parts per trillion. So that standard is set to be protective of health, and the levels even pre-treatment are below that. So that's my understanding from discussion with Mr. Harper and some of the information that he sent. So again, the levels are below the Mass DEP promulgated standards, and thus wouldn't present a significant health risk at this point. But again, the presence of the PFAS in the well, I know, is a concern to the North Chelmsford Water District and DEP, and so we're assessing it on actually an expedited time frame to really identify where these contaminants are coming from.
Thank you.
Yes, it's true what they say, that dilution is a solution to pollution.
That they say, and that's one of the measures that the North Chelmsford Water District seems to be taking is blending the water, as Mr. Harper had indicated, and it's again effective at reducing the concentrations with the blended water to below the standards, and then with carbon, helping to further treat the water. It is below the Mass DEP thresholds.
Can I make a comment? Am I on?
Yes, Bruce, you're on. Go ahead.
Well, Paul, can you explain to the board solution is not the problem to the dilution? Because the forever chemicals don't break down, they actually get worse. So long chain carbons actually turn to small chain carbons, which actually are the problem.
Yeah, and as I started off, PFAS, it's been on the news, very persistent compound, very soluble in water, and they do break down as well. They're complex carbon chains, and as Bruce indicated, they do break down. So one of the reasons that we measure this in parts per trillion rather than parts per billion or parts per million, and the their health effects have been shown to be adverse, from various standpoints. So that's the heightened urgency that Mass DEP has asked us to investigate and really expedite the assessment. And at the end of this, I should say, so we have a 10-month time frame. They've given us an interim deadline. Mass DEP, Bureau of Waste Cleanup, has given us a 10-month time frame to really complete the assessment and identify if there is a source that can be remediated, come up with a plan within that 10-month time frame to actually identify how that remediation will take place.
So that'll wind up
And
being
Bruce, I didn't say that. I
10
didn't
months
say that
from
to be.
March.
No, I don't mean that, Kev, but it is, when it breaks down, it's misleading, because when it breaks down, it actually gets worse. That's what, Paul, I just wanted to clarify that. It doesn't get better, it gets worse as it breaks down. It breaks down to smaller contaminants, which are harder to get out.
Right.
But
The
where it
filters
breaks
can't
down,
catch them.
it's kind of a little bit misleading. It doesn't break down, it actually gets worse as it breaks down.
So yeah, so and when you say the dilution is solution to pollution, it's here we've got I would say there's a massive contaminants in the groundwater, and even though it may be diluted, Mass DEP has asked us, and part of the regulatory program, the regulations we operate under are called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, or MCP, really want us to look at the source of these impacts and identify if they are or do pose a risk. Then that's when remediation or mitigation will be needed. So the time frame for that is actually October. It's all deadlines are calculated from the notification date. So that was December 11th, 2020. So 10 months from then is actually October 11th, 2021. So that's the deadline where Mass DEP has asked us to complete our assessment and identify if remediation is warranted.
Just another clarification if I could make, Paul, that the previous samples taken on October 7th and, in your opinion, November 11th were correctly taken, and the numbers have actually only increased since then. They haven't gone down. We actually asked the DEP to expedite the 10 months to even shorten that time frame, because your letter from the DEP was based on the October 7th findings, not the most recent.
So yeah, I can't speak to how the samples were collected in October or November. Part of the reason why we collected the January results is, now I can speak to how the methodology and how they were collected. As I indicated, the results have sort of, have increased. So they went from 125 to 536, and our latest samples were 657. So they are in an increasing trend there, and why that is part of the assessment. It could be seasonal fluctuations, it could be sampling method, it could be analytical methodology, could be a myriad of factors, and that's part of our assessment, is to try and explain why that is. And just to speak to the time frame, I mean, a typical time frame to evaluate if under the MCP, under the regulations that we operate under, typically from notification through when DEP wants us to close a case, us being LSPs and Town of Chelmsford, typically there's a 6-year time frame, and within that 6-year time frame, identification of remediation and sort of identifying if there's a risk would be about 3 to 4 years out. So the 10-month time frame is a significant jump up in how quickly DEP wants us to act on this.
But in your experience, Paul, and I can speak in other surrounding towns like Ayer, I won't mention Barnstable, they've already actually started remediation because the levels are so high. They also had the problem with, I think you and I spoke about the 1,4-dioxane. So, I mean, yeah, you're saying 4 to 6 years, but these other water suppliers have actually jumped into it a lot sooner. So, I mean, 4 to 6 years might be too late.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Mass DEP has recognized that, and that's one of the reasons they asked us to really get our arms around the problem in a 10-month time frame rather than wait for the standard MCP timelines to play out over several years.
Are there any other questions for Paul or Bruce?
Gary, and I have a question. Gary and Steve, have you talked with Paul at all about the plans to temporarily move the Engine 2 operations to that site, and whether that affects the effort in the next 10 months relative to this issue?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. I have shared the information that we were shared with Paul, that the fire station, what they're planning on using it for and what they're doing should not affect the efforts that are going on. They should not be adding anything to that.
Let me ask you a question, Gary.
Yes.
How about mutual aid coming into that department? Not only the town of Chelmsford is going to use that property, if there's a case, if they have a 2 or 3 alarm fire, there is going to be coverage by off-site fire departments. Could be Lowell, could be Tangible, could be Dunstable, not just Chelmsford occupying those buildings. Is that true?
I'm not, well, yes, it's true, but I'm not exactly sure how they run the mutual aid. I hate to say this, but that's more of a Gary Ryan question. I know the first thing they usually do is send them to the center station, to man the station while they're out doing fires. If a blaze becomes more than, say, 2 or 3 alarms and you have other communities, honestly, Bruce, I couldn't tell you if they end up.
Oh, I know they do. They said that.
At every station, though, is what I'm trying to say. I don't know that. I know they come to town, and I know they sometimes man stations, or sometimes they're sent to the fire.
Right. Is there any guarantee these mutual aid departments are not using any type of PFAS components in their vehicles? Or any other type of contaminants? Because some of these Dunstable, Tingsboro, they actually don't have water supplies where they're drafting out of, rivers, ponds, and so forth.
I would have to speak with Gary on that first, to be honest with you.
I'm just saying a lot of research should be done before they move into that, make that move.
Yeah, if I may add something, Steve actually gave me a tour of the property when we did our initial sampling activities. At first, blush, we went over some of the activities that are happening at the property, and I didn't, observe anything that would be, overt source of these impacts. But, in speaking with Bruce and doing our research, there may have been historical operations that could be a source, but nothing ongoing. So doesn't mean that, other equipment or anything that brought in, may be sources, but it'd be something that we should be, watching to make sure there isn't any additional contributing sources to the impacts that potentially could originate from 54 Richardson Road. So,
because as of recently, Paul, there was probably a dozen Ashland tree service trucks parked on that property, and we don't know what those trucks are carrying as far as fuel goes, and what else is on those trucks, and that was a concern of ours also, that the town was using, Ashland was using town property to house their trucks when they were doing, work around town and outside of town.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of uses down there that should be prohibited.
Again, we should, there's PFAS that's being detected in wells. So whatever can be done to prevent, any future releases of PFAS from that property or any other operations would certainly be wise to implement. So
I agree.
And just so folks know, I mean, like the PFAS with firefighting, this is a question I certainly asked, but one of the known sources of PFAS is firefighting foam. So it didn't appear that those kind of operations were going on in that property, but there are, I should say, there is a wide uses of PFAS that are known, and it's your stain guards on sofas, Teflon frying pans, firefighting foam, cleaning products, waxes. It's just a wide range of potential sources and uses of PFAS historically from the 1940s, and now we're becoming aware of it. So people are voluntarily stopping to use these products, but they were fairly prevalent use from the 1940s up until recently.
Excuse me, Paul, if some of this stuff get in the water supply itself, in the drinking water, what type of, result would have, what would the danger be to those to the water takers, to the people that are drinking the water. And excuse me, but I did miss one meeting. I think the last time you were here, wasn't here. Maybe you went over it at that point. And apologize, but just curious. I live right there, as a matter of fact, but not that it matters. But I just like, and I know other people would like to know as well. So, and maybe there isn't any. I don't know. You could clear that up. I'd appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. So just to reiterate, I mean, presently the levels, the blended levels, and I'm sure Bruce can speak to this, but the blended levels from the production wells are, that water, the raw influent prior to treatment is actually below the maximum contaminant limit as set by Massachusetts DEP, Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup and Drinking Water Program. So currently the levels of this contaminant are below what would be deemed as a significant risk. So that's the good news. Yeah. But PFAS, it has been identified again as it causes health effects. It has reproductive issues. I think there's an increased incidence of cancer, immune system, liver and kidney issues. These are some of the adverse health effects that could come from exposure to PFAS at again at elevated levels. And so just to emphasize again that the levels so far that are in the drinking water supply, and Bruce can speak to this better than I can, but are below the action levels that are set by DEP. So that's the good news. But again, there's the presence of these compounds were detected by the town personnel when they sampled these wells. We verified it in our January sampling, and so DEP has asked us to continue forth with our assessment, and we'll be looking to identify sources of the impacts both on and off site, and go from there.
Thank you. When will you be out there again?
So the report's due in a few weeks with the plan. So we will put forth a plan which will include installation and sampling of additional monitoring wells beyond the 3 that are already existing out there. And so the hope would be, once DEP approves that plan, we want to move quickly on it. That's the interim deadline that we're operating under. So we really need to get out there, install those wells, sample them quickly, because multiple rounds may be needed, and there may be seasonal fluctuations as well. So the quicker we get that additional monitoring wells and the well network in place, and we can begin to monitor it, the better.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Can I just clarify a couple more things, Paul? And you're correct. I have the luxury right now. My raw water, my combined water raw is under 15, but the water treatment plant was not built for PFAS removal. It was built for chloride removal, which is a byproduct of chlorine dioxide that we use for iron and manganese. So the reason why, if the COX stays at 15, if that thing migrates any further towards me and my numbers go above 20, I will actually be in violation, because my carbon could actually have breakthrough, and then I'd be in violation with the DEP's 20 nanograms per liter. So mitigation is going to be something that we're really going to have to look for to keep that plume from moving down gradient towards our wells. So I think I'm just, the point I'm trying to get is the water treatment plant that was put on back in 2011 was not built for PFAS removal. It's actually, fortunately, I have it there and it's doing its job, but that's not the design of the carbon.
Any other questions? Paul, I thank you for coming out tonight. Bruce, thanks for logging in. Steve and Gary, thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening.
So, Paul, I'll go to you with the sewer capacity study.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Steve. Steve's sort of been quarterbacking the sewer capacity for DPW, as well as obviously, all things going in terms of the moratorium, as well as this study that's we've engaged Wesson and Sampson to do. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just give the board kind of a brief update on where we're at. Overall numbers, as well as we're in the beginning stages of the capacity and flow study that we engaged with Weston and Sampson on. As far as kind of overall flows, looking at the last calendar year, we're down a little bit, about 5.5% based on my crunching numbers. If that's, related to COVID shutdowns or some other factors, it's tough to tell. Just briefly looking at a breakdown a little bit ago of some billing cycles, seemed like, commercial, industrial had a little bit of a tick down. That would be like your gyms, your hotels, things like that. Obviously, we're down. Restaurants are down. Residential flows have ticked up a little bit. Obviously, people are home for periods through the spring, as we were in kind of lockdown, shutdown mode, whatever you want to call it. So it's tough to get a read. Our numbers had kind of been steadily ticking up over the last 3 years, but we got a little bit of a reprieve this year with the flow being down a little bit. Gives us an opportunity to fully study what we need to do going forward. Looking at the contract we went into with Weston and Sampson, there's basically 5 tasks in that contract, 2 of which have to deal with the city of Lowell and the other member towns in the regional wastewater utility. Weston and Sampson and the team have been able to get some publicly available data about the operations of the plant, some reporting over at DEP, things like that. Still hopeful to get some more raw data right from Lowell wastewater. Hopefully that we can get that done over the next few weeks. If we don't get anywhere, it may turn into having to do a records request, public records request, but we're hopeful that we don't have to do that, obviously, with a neighboring community. Again, they're starting to crunch some of those numbers. The team has also been in contact a couple of times with Tingsborough's consultant, as well as myself, and I know town manager would speak to it as well. The neighboring communities are all very willing to sit down at the table. It's just sometimes we get a little bit of dead air, I guess. I don't know how else to say it, from low wastewater. The buck kind of stops with them about setting up a meeting. So hopefully we can get that process moving here in the next couple of weeks. Have a call like this where we can speak about the plant, speak about the other communities' needs, and at least take the next step. If that's talking to DEP about the rate of the plant and the limits, maybe we can get some updates on City of Lowell's appeal with their permit that was filed a year or so ago. It'd be nice to get some of that moving along. As far as a couple of the other things, some of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, is looking at some of the reports that were done through the last 10, 15 years, either for community development, had sort of a report done through a grant back in 2010. The Sewer Commission had a few updates through the years, starting back into like 2002, or even go back when it was voted in the mid-90s, I guess. I forget if it was 95 or 96, to sewer 100% of the town. And a facilities update study was done. It was commented then in 1997 in that study that there could potentially be an issue with the hard cap capacity that we have of the 3.01 million gallons per day. Obviously, the Sewer Commission and the town offered up 350,000 gallons a day to the town of Tingsboro. 700,000 gallons a day was offered to the town of Westford, but when it was voted to sewer the 100% of town, that offer was taken back because that capacity was going to be needed. So with that, just looking into some of the recommendations through the years, and those even up to the inflow and infiltration study that was done, if you remember, it was approved at town meeting and the sewer budget was approximately $280,000. We did 35 flow meters around town, rain gauges and the like, just to try to get a handle on the amount of inflow from groundwater into our system. be it that the system is relatively new in the world of sewer systems, 35 years old, roughly is the oldest part of the system, as opposed to something like Lexington, Everett, around the city, that's old clay pipe, leaks all, we don't have a whole lot. Do we get seasonal inflow? Yeah, absolutely. It could be one gasket, one pipe, but we're not going to go, into a neighborhood or into a street and find that magic 20,000 gallons by, replacing 1,000 feet of pipe. We just don't have that. We might have a gasket leaking in the pipe, like I say, or a pick hole in a manhole leaking a little bit, seal gone bad, something like that. We just don't have a massive amount of groundwater inflow into our system anyway in Chelmsford. The city of Lowell, on the other hand, they were under order to start removing some of their combined sewer and their inflow into their interceptors, and they were running big projects a few years back doing that. Obviously, currently, I think what they did is they picked off all the easy targets. Now they're into, massive multi-million-dollar projects, and I don't think they think they're going to get the bang for the buck doing it. So it's just kind of, hopefully we can line all this up and come with something going forward. Even if as minimal as it is, to do something on our end to help reduce some flows. One of the other tasks was looking at the Barica option, any potential with them. I know they were starting to have reach out to Barica officials over the next week or so. They've done a little bit of background on our system to try to figure, an estimated cost, high-level cost to reconfigure our infrastructure, because obviously all our infrastructure points away from Barica. Now we'd have to reroute some systems towards Barica if that was a viable option. Easy targets are 4 of the 5 pump stations in East Chelmsford on the other side of Route 3. Take some flow, and then there's the potential, or they're at least they're estimating a number to take possibly the Mill Road station, which carries some significant flow, as well as the Progress Ave station, and head those down 129. The problem with that is we'd have to hang off the side of the Route 3 bridge, so cost could certainly be a factor. And then plus we don't know, number one, if the treatment plant in Barica has available capacity, if they'd be willing to give us any, or what their infrastructure would be, even if we could get some of our flow to them. We might have to do infrastructure upgrades in Barica if we even got to that point. But we're trying to cross the T's and dot the I's on the easy stuff there. We might, the phone call might be, do you have any capacity? Would you be willing to sell any of it to us? And they say no, so we just cross that one off the list. It could be as simple as that. And then the fifth task was the potential to look at 3-4 different sites for our own treatment plant, be it either our own or a joint venture with the town of Tingsboro, somewhere up. The easy target is Southwell Fields initially, because all our infrastructure points right there. That's a third of our daily flow, roughly. So it would be simple. They've started doing some of the homework on that property, for groundwater levels, groundwater flows. Obviously, the state won't give you a discharge permit to the river anymore. So it's got to be a groundwater discharge treatment facility. So there's a lot of things that can get kind of crossed off in the initial stages. And then we had a conversation, I had a call with them end of last week. I got to do some homework on my end to try to find some pieces of land that could potentially hold a facility like this, so they can do some analysis on that. I'm going to try to maybe grab some, right around the Tingsboro line, as well as sort of around the North Chelmsford area, but then I'm going to open it up to all over town if we could grab, a bit of flow in certain spots where, not that there's much available land for something like this, but, we have to at least cover all the bases. So I guess, with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions or anything else that anybody would have.
How much land would you need to do a reasonable size that would take a lot of pressure off current capacity and be able to expand a little bit?
Yeah, so we're looking at pieces, 5 to 10 acres at the moment, just because of how, if you're familiar with a groundwater discharge plant, at the end of there's one over in Acton that you can kind of see from the road, South Acton, right by the Concord line. It just ends up being a series of kind of sand humps, and the discharge filters through. So you need a fairly significant area. I know the town of Littleton is in the process with the sewerage around the center. They're starting the same type of thing, and they're looking for, had some targets or some land around the same size. We'd be looking, in conversations we had with Tingsboro, they were obviously, if you folks remember, a few months back, they were looking to pass some additional flow through us to get to the city of Lowell. So we wouldn't just design this thing for, the roughly 1 million gallons a day that runs through Southwell. We would want to design for at least 1.5 million.
Yeah.
If not slightly larger. Obviously, we're limited by land. That way it allows for some growth, at least in that area.
Is that more like how you explained that situation up in Acton or whatever? Is that more like a major leaching field? Is that basically what that is?
Somewhat. It's just not like your traditional, set of pipes and sand trenches. It kind of runs through different filters with your treatment process, and then, through this big area where it continues to pool and filter out.
But as far as infrastructure was concerned, that's where it would be a lot less expensive to locate over in the North Chelmsford area, right? Because a lot of it's flowing that way anyway to get to the pumping station that would send it to Duck Island, right? Or wrong? I mean, maybe I'm.
No, all the infrastructure on basically, North Chelmsford and even up, parts of West Chelmsford and such, and all the 350,000 gallons a day Tingsboro has, basically runs to Southwell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be the prime location. There would be no infrastructure upgrades other than another building. We would just have to relocate 3 softball fields someplace.
Either that or that school over there has some real nice land. I don't know if it's in a flood zone, or maybe they wouldn't want to sell it, or maybe you'd have to take it by eminent domain or something, if that's what it was going to make it happen.
Yeah,
without ruining the softball fields.
The Lighthouse School,
Yes.
Yes, yep. That whole area is all floodplain. Even at the softball fields at Southwell are in floodplain. So that's a hurdle we have to consider in the initial analysis of the property, but
Sure.
Certainly overcomable.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, I think it's worth looking into, that's all.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm not sure Lowell's ever gonna, I don't know if they're ever gonna bail out, to be truthful. And Tingsboro's certainly not gonna get in there. Well, they may, who knows? They may be from the other side of the river too, but
Well, at the end of the day, the plant is permitted for 32 million gallons per day. They have an on-paper limit. Conversations with them, the plant will handle more than that, but their permit through the state or through federal government, EPA, because it's a river discharge, is 32 million gallons per day.
But they don't allow that anymore. They probably got one of those large permits, right?
Yeah, that would have been, it's good to be grandfathered at this point.
Yeah, sure.
They certainly wouldn't have the land over there to change it at this point.
No, absolutely not. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Pat, Virginia, any questions? No? Okay. Again, thanks for being on. Any other comments, Paul?
No, like I said, we'll keep you updated periodically.
So we'll move to
Is
traffic
there,
study
I
update.
guess the only question I have is there like a time frame when you'll document the study?
Well,
I know it's dynamic, but
yeah. So I think as we cross off a task, we'll have either a presentation to the board here, or we'll get some kind of simple 1-page letter report from from Weston and Sampson indicating that, task 2, is complete, and here's what came about for that. The contract runs through the end of September, I believe, which, case in point, why the moratorium runs through the end of October, which also encompassed fall town meeting if we needed action at that point.
Great, thank you.
Well, do you have a preference as to what type of situation you'd like to see? I'm sure as long as it's satisfied our needs, you don't really, it wouldn't matter, but I mean, I suppose most cost efficient would also help,
Yeah, I think the long-term solution is probably, has to be exhaust the plant in Lowell for both Chelmsford, Dracut, Lowell, obviously, and Tingsboro. Tewksbury seems to be okay so far with capacity. And I think the data and the information hopefully will become more clear in the weeks ahead. I think the challenge of locating a new plant, whether it's in North Chelmsford or what have you, is two things. One is the cost, and then the second one is acceptance. I don't think people get excited with the idea of locating a sewage treatment plant in their neighborhood because of the concerns, particularly odor, that tend to be associated with plants. And I think that that's why I think we really need to exhaust the Lowell option first. And if anyone who's followed the Lowell plant, one of the big concerns and objections to that facility in Lowell is the odor impact it has on adjoining neighborhoods. And
it's across the river.
Exactly. So that's why I think we really got to exhaust the Lowell system. Also, I think that the Lowell system probably gives us the best chance of getting outside resources from the federal and state government, to address a regional solution to a problem, as opposed to being on our own or just with the town of Tingsboro.
Financially, you mean? You're talking
about? Oh, yeah, exactly. Whether that comes from federal assistance, Laurie Trahan has committed herself previously to assessing the sewer overflow problem from the Lowell wastewater plant. And it's probably only natural to see if she can assist with the capacity problem. As Steve noted earlier, it's a tough nut. Lowell has done all the low-hanging fruit on the wastewater, but the board may be aware, but within the last month, there's a new state requirement that was enacted by the legislature at the end of the calendar year, where they now have to publicly report all the sewer stormwater overflow into the river, when it occurs, and they have to notify downstream recipients of that. So that you can clearly see this as an elevated issue at the state level and clearly at the federal level, because it's an essential infrastructure, for communities. As I've often said, if the governor wants to promote and the solution is the additional housing supply that's needed in the state and the region, then obviously you have to have the infrastructure to accommodate the additional housing supply. Never mention the other parts of development, such research and other utilizers of wastewater. So I think really the big solution is probably somehow anchored to the city of Lowell.
They were supposed to separate that about 10 years ago, and they apparently didn't really do the job, I guess, huh?
No, I think for them, as Steve noted, it's a financial hurdle. And then, you can threaten them with fines and penalties, but at what point can the city absorb fines and penalties? And that's why I know that the Congresswoman Trahan will, again, I'm sure at the new Congress, be again seeking legislative support and obviously financial support from the Congress for, again, these aren't problems that are unique to the greater Lowell area. They're nationwide issues.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the final thing on my report, Mr. Chairman, is a traffic safety report. Chief Spinney is here, and Gary Perschetti, obviously with the chief, are on the traffic safety committee. And we just have a brief report, given that we're in the winter months of January. So I'll turn it over to Chief Spinney at this point.
Thank you. Members of the board, good evening. You can hear me okay? The police department conducted two traffic speed studies late last year. Those were in response to some emails the committee received. The first one being Middleton Road near the lime quarry. We've also received periodic complaints on that area for quite some time. So we've diverted a lot of resources to that area. But this fall, we put the traffic counter out, the same one I've discussed before. Mr. Manager, are you able to share that, the graph?
I don't have sharing capabilities. I mean, I just don't have it on. I don't have it on TC in front of me.
Chief, if you give me 2 seconds, I can try to get that pulled up here.
Okay, it's the similar one. It's the exact same model as the board has reviewed on the 2 prior things. So let me know when you pull that up. While we're waiting, the limitations of the equipment is it's important to remember it's only 1 lane of travel. So in this particular study, it's capturing all westbound traffic, leaving the center, traveling westbound on Route 110 towards Westford. That's the lane that the traffic counter captured during the time frame of November 23rd to November 29th.
Well, it was in the
If you can
It's in
just
the
let me
packet,
share, I have it. I have the file. If somebody can give me share capability.
Pete, will you give Virginia the? I don't know why I have it. I just can't. It's not opening for me. It's just spinning.
Go ahead, Virginia. You can share.
Thanks, Pete. All right, Chief.
Okay, so if we can go right to that first graph, Littleton Road at Long Quarry. Thank you. Perfect. Appreciate it. So obviously on the left, we have the date. Along the top are all the mile per hour increments in 5s. So what I did was I did a quick summary of percentages. So important to remember, the speed zone of that section of Littleton Road for us, actually all Littleton Road has been consistently marked down to 40 miles an hour. So the state did that fall, and that was after a number of, we had reached out a number of times with regards to complaints in that area. It used to be a 45, and it jumped around. I think it jumped from a 45 to a 40, back to a 45. So glad to see the entire stretch in Chelmsford is now 40. So at the conclusion of the study, we found that oddly enough, and in a positive note, 36% of all cars captured were actually traveling under the posted speed limit of 40 miles an hour. 44% of the vehicles were doing 5 miles an hour over the 40 speed zone. 18% of the vehicles were traveling 10 miles an hour over the speed limit of 40 miles an hour. So when you combine all of it, 98% of all vehicles captured were not going greater than 10 miles an hour over the posted limit of 40. So I was very pleased to see that. We've gotten a lot of complaints on that stretch, especially perceived speeding by trucks. That's certainly not the case here. So for an average speed of 42 miles an hour, probably a combination of things. Again, speed limit being dropped, they put a number of new speed limit signs on that stretch. I think that's helped. And the amount of enforcement the police department's done out there, in addition to the North Chelmsford locations, we tried to hit that stretch quite a bit after we received some emails about concerns of speeding vehicles. Next one is Western Street at Dalton Road. This was also done as a result of an email that came in to the traffic committee. There was some line of sight issues in this particular area that the DPW is in, either has or is addressing with some extra signage. The concern was also for one particular individual that they felt the cars were really making a raceway out of that section, and they were concerned about it. So we deployed the equipment from December 2nd to December 7th on Westford Street at Dalton. So outbound on Westford Street, leaving the center, heading away from the center on Westford Street, approaching Dalton Road on your right. So after looking at all the data, 77% of all vehicles captured were going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, which is 30. 19% were going 10 miles an hour over the limit. 3%, 15 or more miles an hour over the speed limit. So all in all, 96% of the vehicles were doing a maximum of 10 miles an hour over the speed limit or less. So again, very positive results. Anytime we can keep most vehicles under 10 over, that's a good thing. Important to note, this again, the limitations of this equipment is only one lane, and I do, in my opinion, I think on December 7th we lost some data, and a number of reasons for that. If the weather is inclement, the sign doesn't it does not function properly, and if the light hits the sign a certain way, it can affect the sign's ability to capture the vehicles as they pass through the radar area. But all in all, with the vehicles captured, very happy with those results. So that is my speed study report.
So just, a quick update on some of the stuff we've been working on. That reconfiguration kind of discussion at Ledge and Dunstable to be able to force the trucks or to make it more opportune, I guess, to go left towards Tingsboro. After I did my kind of initial design, I started trying to put an estimate together, and I'm looking at about $350,000 to $400,000, not including any land that would be taken from that house or need to be taken, I should say, from that house on the corner. This starts on Ledge Road, approximately about the culvert, just after the sewer pump station. Widens the road a little bit and then starts to swing to be able to make the left turn. There's a wall that would need to be installed next to that new home. Just because of the grade change, I have an approximate 6-foot grade change I'd have to make up. So I'm going to be kind of raising Ledge Road a little bit, as well as trying to lower Dunstable Road a little bit, just to make this feasible for a tractor trailer or a trailer dump, basically, to be able to go left. Excuse me, I have to kind of encompass the biggest vehicle. Hopefully here, maybe at the next update we do from the committee, I can have kind of a sketch plan, just to give you a visual, so the board can see exactly what I'm talking about. I can get a local engineering company to run the truck turn template on there, so you see exactly what, the amount of space needed to be able to make one of those vehicles go left. With that, Richardson Road and Princeton Street, we submitted some initial information, I should say, to Mass DOT to put a potential project there on the TIP program from Mass DOT. The initial submittal is what's called a PNF project need form. DOT received that information, asked for some additional information. We forwarded that along. We actually have a call with the District 4 people next Tuesday, I believe, to discuss the project. This project involves some sidewalk improvements, Princeton Street, as well as the installation of a traffic signal. We had done traffic signal warrants at that location, which is counts, turning movements, etc. Back prior to COVID, so we have real world numbers. If we had to do it today, the numbers would be clearly a lot lower, especially with no school traffic. But that did hit the warrants for a traffic signal, so we're starting that process with Mass DOT. I know Chief Spinney spoke of the signage on Westford Street. We dig safe that towards the end of last week. Signage is at the shop, so the dig safe, I believe, might clear tomorrow. So weather permitting here over the next couple of days, we'll get those installed. The LED stop sign upgrades for school in Graniteville, those should be in shortly. It was roughly a 90-day lead time, I believe, to get those. We're about 60, 70 days in from when I ordered them, so they should be in shortly. And then we'll do some striping upgrades in the springtime as weather allows. Sidewalks along Turnpike Road from the Kinlock Apartments all the way up to Workers. That's in design. We did some test borings a couple weeks ago at the River Meadow Brook crossing. We're gonna have to do a boardwalk there. I think they told me it was about 45 feet long to get us across next to where the big culvert is there. The hope is to have preliminary design here in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, it's on town meeting for, I'm assuming I'm gonna have 3-4 easements I'm gonna need to construct this sidewalk. Once that's done, we can get that process done and get construction started later in the spring. Bus turnaround, we're preparing the taking documents and stuff now, probably for the next traffic meeting or maybe even the next selectmen's meeting. I can present that stuff, and then we can get that easement taken and we can have that ready for construction again in the spring. The rapid flash crosswalk upgrade in the center, some of which was funded by the Grist Mill project out behind Brick House Pizza there. Those should be in shortly as well with the order them the same time as the flashing stop signs. I'm just going to wait on those a little bit until the little undergrounding project happening there, Cushing Place is done, just so we're not tripping over each other. So once they're out of the way and we go in to do a little bit of roadway improvement, sidewalk improvement on that small stretch of Cushing Place, we can get those installed as well. The rapid flash for over behind the Southwell School, we applied for the Shared Streets Grant through Mass DOT. We were denied, or we didn't get awarded the grant the first time. There's a couple more funding opportunities in that same program. I think maybe 1 or 2 more. I can certainly reapply for that. Cost on a set of those is roughly $16,000. Last week, there was the pre-construction meeting for Boston and Concord Road intersection improvements and the culvert replacement that runs through the Triangle Service Center there. That's supposed to, they'll be going through all their submittals and stuff now. I would expect spring construction to start there. And based on their schedule, from what I saw, it was a spring 2023 completion date for that project. That, again, is funded through Mass DOT's TIP program. Same with the next one, the Barica and River Neck Road. That construction is ongoing, mainly on the bridge. That's replacing the culvert right at the intersection. They'll work through the winter, and again, that is expected to be complete spring of 2022. And then a final note there on the kind of the exit renumbering project. I know they started on Route 3 last week. And I believe they're also on 495 as well. With that's the federal program to make all the exit numbers line up across the country, I believe. So each road doesn't have the same exit numbers. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has it.
Anybody?
I'm good,
Thanks,
thanks.
Steve. All right, with that, I'll turn over to you, Paul, for your town manager reports.
Yeah, real brief. I provided for you a second draft of the spring annual town meeting warrant. Recognizing that we're 3.5 hours into this meeting, I won't go through the articles. Just suffice to change that the only addition to the warrant that I sent you 3 weeks ago at your last meeting is I have placed an article on for street acceptances. So, you know, there will be, Steve's working on potentially bringing some roadways for acceptance at Springtown meeting. And then I've added more text for some of the zoning articles. And in fact, Evan sent me some additional revisions today that I think occurred from the planning board's work session last Wednesday night on the zoning articles. And the planning board has on their agenda for this Wednesday night a public hearing on the zoning articles. So again, those will be refined. So where we go from here is I will submit to you in 2 weeks a third draft of the warrant for Springtown meeting, and then your second meeting in February, roughly 4 weeks from now, is the date you're scheduled to sign the warrant. So basically, you know, third draft is pretty much near final. Then it goes to town council for legal review, and then I present you the final form on, you know, for your signatures and posting a month from now in February. So that's where things stand at this point on the warrant. So yes.
I just have one question about the stormwater article. It looks like it just kind of stops at halfway through Article 2 of that new bylaw, and then it doesn't. You know, it references at one point in Article 3 of the bylaw, but it's not here.
Okay, I will check. Town council just reviewed the legal form of that, and he had some comments today. So I will check into that.
Okay.
Article 3 for the stormwater article. Okay.
Thanks.
You've got typos in 11 and 12, I noticed. And I had a question on Article 31, the grinder pump. Are there any differences in the language that's there versus the policy that was approved in the settlement?
No. Again, that's being, a petition article, but my understanding from Dave Foley is he's just codifying what was in the settlement.
Okay. And 33, can you remind me, what are the gristmill easements for?
Oh, this is for Gristmill 1, which is the project that's been completed behind Brick House. Part of that agreement was a pathway, along the edge of the property, which is property that's owned by the the development there. So they have worked with town council, and we have the final form in a plan for those easements that was approved by the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board with that development. And so I actually will insert that map and the description in the next version of the warrant. I just received it from Evan, but basically it's that connection that brings you around the loop that goes from the rail trail along the side of the property. The whole idea of the river walk type of notion. So that's again approved and conveyed as part of that completed project. Behind Brick House.
And I just had a question on Article 19, which is the revolving funds for on-site sewage. Does that relate to, or is it impacted at all by the recent Board of Health letter saying that they want to put any new septic systems on hold?
In talking to Sue Rosa, the health director, if they're going to inspect septic systems, they need a funding mechanism. And the problem with it is they don't know in a given year how many they would have. So for example, they just approved a project on Dunstable Road that had, multiple lots, but in a different year, they may not have that volume. So in order to budget for that appropriately, they would basically just have a fund so that when an applicant, submits that, the money goes into the fund, then they can draw from the fund to pay for any Title V work.
So is the approval of new septic systems is with the planning board, or does the Board of Health get to weigh into that at all?
No, the Board of Health has to provide documentation to the planning board for the planning board to approve a subdivision that has on-site septic. So they're interrelated, but in essence, it falls under the domain of the Board of Health. Much like on a sewer project, we certify that there's sewer capacity. The Board of Health has to certify that the site has adequate soils and capacity for on-site septic. So they're the ones who would administer the fund, and that's part of the planning board subdivision approval.
Okay, thank you.
And then the only other thing I would close up on, and it's not part of my report, but just an FYI, because we're getting all types of questions, and that has to do obviously with about the COVID-19 vaccine clinics. Obviously, people are very anxious to get vaccinated. The governor announced further vaccine locations, and the phase 2 starting next week with people over 75 being vaccinated, and then people over 65 following that, and 2 or more comorbidities. Anyway, the long story short is I want to assure the board and the public, as I can on any occasion, that the Board of Health is actively engaged. The health director, supported by my administration, are actively supporting to have clinics available in Chelmsford. We just completed the successful one for the public safety first responders, which was actually a regional one for 6 communities around us. and I think the Board of Health is trying to assemble a clinic actually for this Thursday for the people who are eligible in phase 1, which are now, anybody in phase 1 is eligible, which are healthcare providers. There's a need still out there, so they're trying to do that this Thursday for the first immunization. And then obviously we're working to get, flu vaccine clinics for phase 2, which are larger numbers. You start getting 75 and older, 65 and older, 2 or more comorbidities, and then obviously going to school teachers, DPW, and then obviously phase 3, where it's the general public. What I can tell you is the lack of detail is not because we're trying to not release information, is that it's a very regulated process from the federal government. And as the governor said today, is the state's having a hard time producing plans because they don't know the supply they're going to get. But what I can tell you is there are efforts. If you notice the locations that have been identified as these super sites for vaccine clinics, like Gillette Stadium, Fenway Park, there's the Reggie Lewis Center and so forth. If you go to the map, or one goes to the map right now, you don't see any in the greater Lowell area. I can assure the board and the community that information that is within hours, that there are ongoing efforts to have a regional facility in basically in Lowell, and then also Chelmsford is looking to have clinics for Chelmsford residents. So I just want to reassure people, and I know the Board of Health is probably putting out the same message, is that we're doing everything that we believe is possible to get this, get the clinics and get going. And again, it's all really going to be dictated by supply, as the governor noted, but we're doing everything we can in terms of, it's basically priority number 1. I mean, the message that I delivered to the employees of the town, and to, more importantly, to the health director and health department, is public health right now. This vaccine is the most important priority, and whatever resources they need that the town can provide to either a town clinic or a regional clinic, we're offering. And I can tell you that right now the response has been tremendous from our community in terms of people who are staffing the clinics. Is also a tremendous response from our firefighters and police officers who are interested and willing to provide assistance in terms of vaccines and even administer vaccines. So I know there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of interest, and as soon as we can, and I'm sure this, and we know it's a priority of the governor, believe me. There was a call before this at 5 o'clock with Secretary Scudders that I listened to for the beginning portion before I came to this meeting. We can assure you, everything is being done possible to get clinics going and vaccines administered, because we know that it's a question of life and health. And so just as more information becomes available, I can tell you it will be put out, and you can imagine everybody's covering this, from the local media to social media to print media to newspapers to websites and so forth. So I just want people to know that stay tuned, and we're doing everything we can, and then we know there's public interest, and I can tell you it's I think the big determinant is going to be supply. As soon as the state gets supply, and as soon as we can get supply, we'll be running those clinics. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On to the 10th item on the agenda, which is Select Board Liaison Assignments. This is just on here to see if there's any interest on with the vacancy on the seat. With the board, we have, let me see, 6, 7, 8 liaisons, and I don't know if you want to reassign them between now and April, or you just want them to sit vacant until April.
I think we should have somebody identified to cover it if there's something.
Okay, so I can just quickly run through these, and you can tell me if anybody wants to just take the ones we have. Agricultural Commission, which if they meet, I will cover.
Okay. I can take the Board of Health, Ken.
I'm just gonna public schools, but you're doing that, Virginia.
I've already got the public schools, so.
I can take the other one. If we need another one in public schools, I can take that.
Okay.
It's up to you, Pat. I think we had just done it because there were 2 interest in it, but whatever, that's fine.
I'll let you be the primary.
Okay, thank you. Liaison to Rep. Quebec.
I know her pretty well, so I could take that
Okay.
for 2 months.
Permanent building.
I didn't see that
I'll
one.
take it. Recycling committee.
I can do it if nobody else wants it.
I mean, I don't mind doing it.
The first
I'll
Thursday I
take
could do
back.
it.
Roberts, I'll do it. Robertsfield.
I can do it.
I mean, it's always needed.
Yeah.
May not end up. And then community preservation.
That's a voting position, right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
The Wednesdays are really
Yeah,
challenging.
they meet the third Wednesday each month.
Yeah, I can't do that one because that's my NEMCOG night, so.
Well, it's only 2 more meetings, so I'll do it.
Yeah. You sure you want to take on all those, Kim? I mean, I don't mind taking like permanent building committee. Because it seems like you're
Well, again, I mean, it's just a couple months.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to take permanent building, I'll let you. That's fine.
okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
I can do it for 2 months.
My wife's probably watching and ready to kill me, so thanks. All right, that was quick. That was fast and easy. Thank you. So with that, liaison reports and referrals. Pat, do you have anything?
I do not have anything tonight.
George? How you holding up?
I don't have any, Kenny.
Okay. Virginia?
I do. So from the school committee, their next meeting on February 2nd is going to be a preliminary budget presentation with Dr. Lang. And at their following meeting on February 23rd, there'll be an opportunity for public comment on the school budget. The planning board has 3 public hearings this coming Wednesday, January 27th. They're continuing the public hearing on the Oddfellows Fisk campus renovations and the new multifamily building that's being proposed there. There's a new public hearing scheduled for 248 Princeton Street, which is the former Glenview restaurant, for a 10-unit multifamily development. And as Paul mentioned, they have a public hearing planned on January 27th for the zoning articles for Springtown meeting. If you've already looked at the agenda, the date was published incorrectly and the corrected date was published incorrectly, and I'm not sure if the file was the correct file. So look tomorrow when the date's updated, get the correct file. But there are 3 categories: modifications to Center Village parking, some definitions and use tables for things like e-commerce, fulfillment centers, dark stores, and ghost kitchens, and then some definitions and use tables to various categories of marijuana establishments and businesses. From the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan, they're very happy to report to the public that CPC approved funding for the Varney and Southwell playground projects. And Steve Callahan is currently working with a group of neighborhood parents to define what the best options are in terms of replacing the equipment and putting up those new playgrounds. And the Age Friendly Committee would like the public to know that they are working with a group of volunteers from Chelmsford High School who will offer snow shoveling to seniors and disabled adults. So if you need help with snow shoveling, please call the Senior Center at 978-251-0533 and ask for Elena. And Paul, I've gotten a couple of different inputs on the telephone and website, but in the interest of time, I'll just take it offline with you and let you know what those are.
Okay.
It's nothing urgent.
Okay, thank you, Virginia. I just have a couple quick ones. EDC met again for the first time in, I think it was like 9 months. So I'm happy they're back together. They're excited to get back to work, and I think they're going to do monthly meetings. Commissions on Disability. I think I forget if this was in my last report or if we talked about it, but Lena Olnichik has retired as the ADA coordinator. So they'll be looking for someone to fill that position. And those are my two updates. And with that, let me go back to the agenda. We have any press questions? I don't see anybody from the press on. And I have nothing in the chat box. So that's that. I will now take any motions.
I will motion to adjourn.
Again,
A motion, a second. All in favor, Pat?
Aye.
George?
aye.
Virginia?
Aye.
And I will vote aye. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Yep.